Story 1.
My wife looked me dead in the eye and told me that going through her phone was a worse betrayal than the 6 months of explicit messages I found between her and her former student. Let that satisfying delusion sink in for a second. So here's what happened. I caught my wife having an affair with a guy she'd been grooming since he sat in her classroom. I sent every filthy message to his rich wife, and within 72 hours, her billionaire father was dismantling this kid's entire life. While my wife was still out there telling people, I'd be crawling back any day now. She miscalculated badly. I'm 37 male. My wife is Kate, 35, a teacher who apparently never stopped mentoring her favorite student. The affair partner is Rumi, 28, married to Priya, whose father, Victor, is the kind of wealthy man who doesn't yell, he litigates. My buddy Derek is the one who lit the fuse when he called me stammering about what he'd just seen at a downtown restaurant. And me, I'm the husband who never wanted to play dirty but ended up outplaying every single one of them. Let me back up and give you the full picture, because none of this makes sense without understanding what Kate and I were before Derek's phone call blew it apart. We'd been married 4 years, together 6. Kate taught English at a well-regarded private high school, and she was genuinely good at it, the kind of teacher students remembered a decade later. I worked in commercial real estate, boring but stable, and between the two of us, we'd built something comfortable. A 3-bedroom house with a yard that was too big for 2 people, but perfect for the kids we kept saying we'd have next year. Date nights on Thursdays. A shared Netflix queue. The whole quiet architecture of a life that looks unremarkable from the outside, but feels like home when you're inside it. I loved her. That's not complicated. That's just the truth I have to say out loud before the rest of this story makes me sound like I never did. Now. Derek? He called me on a Tuesday evening. I was grilling chicken thighs on the back patio, and when I picked up, there was this long pause, the kind of silence that has weight to it. Derek is not a man who hesitates. He once told our college roommate to his face that his girlfriend was stealing from him. But that night, he sounded like someone trying to defuse a bomb with his voice. Hey man, so I was at Luca's downtown for Sarah's birthday thing. Okay, Kate was there. My hand stopped turning the tongs. Not because that was alarming, Kate went out with friends all the time, but because of what his voice was doing. The way it kept dipping, like each word cost him something. She wasn't alone, brother. He described it in fragments. Kate in a corner booth, a younger guy. His hand on her thigh, not casually, possessively. Her leaning into him, laughing with her whole body the way she used to laugh with me in our first year. Derek said they kissed. Not a peck. Not ambiguous. The kind of kiss that makes strangers look away. I wanted to come over to your place right then, Derek said. But I didn't know if I was making it bigger than... You're not making it bigger. I knew. Somewhere beneath the denial, already assembling itself in my brain, I knew. Because when Kate came home that night, she told me she'd been at a coworker's wine tasting. She described the wines. She described the cheese board. She described a funny story about someone's husband. The level of detail was immaculate, the kind of specificity that only liars provide because truth tellers don't need to convince you. She never mentioned a restaurant. She never mentioned a man. That silence was louder than anything, Derek told me. I waited 3 days. I smiled at breakfast. I kissed her goodbye for work. I sat through a Thursday date night at our usual Italian place and watched her face for cracks while she talked about a student's college essay. Nothing. She was flawless. And that's what terrified me, how natural deception looked on her. Friday night, Kate fell asleep on the couch during a movie, her phone on the coffee table face down. I stared at it for 11 minutes. I know because the movie's runtime was ticking in the corner of the screen. 11 minutes of arguing with myself about privacy, about trust, about whether I was becoming the paranoid husband who ruins a good thing over a friend's misunderstanding. Then I picked it up. Her passcode was our anniversary. That detail still burns. I found the contact listed as Rumi16. Not Rumi, not a normal name entry. Rumi16, like a username, like a code designed to look meaningless if you scrolled past it. I didn't scroll past it. 6 months of messages. The first few were almost sweet inside jokes, references to books, the kind of intellectual flirtation Kate would have called mentorship if cornered. But they escalated fast. By month 2, the messages were explicit in a way that made my stomach physically contract. Descriptions of what they'd done. Plans for what they'd do next. Photos I will never unsee. And then I found the detail that turned heartbreak into something colder. Rumi had been her student. Not a college peer, not a colleague, a 17-year-old boy in her classroom. The 16 inches his contact name wasn't random. It was the year 2016, when he was in her class. The messages referenced their history, joked about how far they'd come since the back row. Kate's previous relationship, the one before me, the one she said ended because her ex was emotionally unavailable, had ended because of Rumi. She'd been circling this man for a decade. I exported everything. Every message, every photo, every timestamp. I emailed the files to myself, deleted the sent record, and put her phone back on the coffee table. Then I sat in our dark kitchen for 2 hours, feeling something harden behind my ribs, like wet concrete setting. Saturday morning, I confronted her. I expected tears. Begging. The standard playbook. Instead, Kate's face cycled through surprise, then irritation, then something I can only describe as righteous fury directed entirely at me. You went through my phone. You've been sleeping with your former student for 6 months. You violated my privacy, and you want to talk about Kate. 6 months. She stood up from the kitchen table, grabbed her keys, and said the sentence that sealed her fate: "You'll be calling me by Monday, begging me to come home. I guarantee it." The door slammed. Her car started. And I sat there, jaw tight, already composing an email to Priya. I wanted to meet her and reveal everything, but I didn't make the move because it would have looked creepy. Some strange man showing up at a woman's door claiming her husband was a cheat. So I asked around, found Priya's email through Rumi's barely private social media, and sent it to her. Everything. The full export. She responded within an hour times. "How did you discover the truth?" asterisk. I told her everything in detail. I told her to read the messages carefully, and she would get all the clarity she needed. After a couple of hours, she responded asking if I had confronted Kate. I said yes. She said that she would involve her father to deal with Rumi and went offline. That was Wednesday. By Saturday, Priya was still gone. No responses. No read receipts. Nothing. I'm trying to reach out to her through all their social media accounts, mutual contacts, anything with a digital pulse. Because Rumi is using her for her father's money. I saw that clearly in the messages, the way he talked about the lifestyle and Victor's connections, and I'm terrified of what a cornered man does when his meal ticket starts, asking questions. Meanwhile, Kate hasn't signed a single document. She's told her mother Gloria that I'm having a breakdown. She's told colleagues at the school that times I, times cheated on, times her asterisk. And 3 days ago, she sent me a text that read, "Times I want the house. My lawyer says I'll get it. Asterisk." She still thinks she's winning. What she doesn't know is that Victor Sandoval has already made his first phone call. Priya resurfaced on a Monday, not with a message, with a phone call. Her voice was flat and controlled the way people sound when they've cried so much their body has simply stopped producing the chemicals for it. "I'm safe," she said. "My father's been handling things. I'm sorry I disappeared. I needed to be somewhere. Rumi couldn't reach me." The relief hit me so hard my knees softened. I'd been imagining headlines. I'd been imagining police reports. What's happening with him? "My father doesn't do things emotionally," Priya said. "He does them permanently." She explained it in pieces, the way you describe a car accident out of order, with strange details made vivid by shock. Victor Sandoval had spent the silent week not confronting Rumi, not yelling, not even acknowledging anything was wrong. Instead, he'd had his forensic accountant pull every financial record from the consulting firm where Rumi worked, the firm Victor's investment group had a controlling interest in. The firm Rumi had been hired into, I now understood, not because of talent, but because of marriage. What the accountant found wasn't planted. It didn't need to be. Rumi had been skimming. Small amounts routed through vendor invoices that didn't correspond to real vendors, padded expense reports for client dinners that never happened, the kind of petty graft that a man with a rich father-in-law commits because he believes the money is functionally his anyway. Victor had compiled it into a criminal referral. Embezzlement. Fraud. Wire fraud, because some of the invoices cross state lines. Federal wire fraud. My father told Rumi's attorney that he has 2 options, Priya said. Full restitution, resignation, and an uncontested divorce, giving me everything. Or prosecution. Jesus. Rumi called it blackmail. My father's lawyer called it a courtesy notification of intended legal action. There's a difference, apparently, when you can afford the right vocabulary. I sat with that for a moment. Victor Sandoval hadn't fought with emotion. He'd fought with accountants and attorneys exactly as Priya had predicted. Rumi's charm, his easy smile, his talent for making women feel like the only person in the room, none of it mattered against a spreadsheet. Then Priya said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Rumi called me yesterday. He doesn't know I told my father about Kate. He thinks this is about the money. He actually asked me. Her voice cracked for the first time. He asked me to talk to my father, to smooth things over. He said he loved me. The dramatic irony was so thick I could taste it. Rumi scrambling to save his marriage to the woman whose father was destroying him times of the affair he didn't know she'd discovered. He thought Kate was irrelevant. He thought this was a financial audit gone wrong. He also asked if I knew you, Priya added quietly. What? He asked if some man named He Used Your Full Name had contacted me. He said Kate warned him you might try something crazy. He wanted to know if you'd reached out. I almost laughed. Almost. What did you tell him? Nothing. I hung up. Kate's campaign, meanwhile, had been escalating. She'd moved in with Gloria, who initially treated me like I'd had a psychotic episode. Kate had told her mother I'd become controlling and paranoid, that I'd fabricated evidence that I was trying to isolate her. Gloria called me once, her voice trembling with protective fury, and said, "She is my daughter and I know her." I said, "Gloria, I'm going to send you something. You don't have to read it, but if you love her, you should." I sent Gloria a curated selection, nothing explicit, nothing designed to humiliate, just enough to show the timeline, the pet names, the references to hotel rooms on nights Kate had told me she was grading papers. Gloria never called me again. But 2 days later, Kate texted me times, "You turned my own mother against me. You're sick." Asterisk. At the school, Kate had been more strategic. She'd told select colleagues that I had cheated, that I was vindictive, that the divorce was my fault. She was building a narrative fortress brick by brick, and I was watching it rise from across the street, knowing exactly how to bring it down. My lawyer said, "Don't." My lawyer said we had the house, we had the prenups, infidelity clause, we had everything we needed for a clean divorce. Kate refused to sign. Her counter-demand, the house, 60% of shared assets and spousal support. Her lawyer sent a letter claiming I had engaged in emotional abuse and surveillance. She wanted to go to trial. She wanted a stage. So I gave her one. I sent the explicit messages redacted of photos but not of content to the head of Kate's department. Not to students. Not to parents. To the one administrator who would understand exactly what "since the back row" meant. Who would understand that Rumi16 wasn't a username, it was a timestamp. The school launched an internal review within 48 hours. Kate was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Her colleagues, the same ones she'd recruited into her narrative, went quiet with the specific silence of people recalculating which side of history they're standing on. Kate called me that night. Not texted. Called. "You'll never work in this town again," she said, her voice vibrating. "Sign the papers, Kate. I will destroy. Sign the papers. Or the unredacted versions go to the Parents Association, the school board, and every platform where your students might see exactly who mentored them." Silence. The kind that has weight to it. She signed on Thursday. The divorce finalized 6 weeks later. I kept the house. She kept nothing she demanded. Rumi, last I heard from Priya, had accepted Victor's terms: full restitution, resignation, uncontested divorce. The alternative was a federal courtroom and a public record that would follow him into every job interview for the rest of his life. Priya messaged me once more after it was done. Asterisk, "Thank you for telling me the truth. I hope you find peace." Asterisk, I told her I hoped the same for her. Then I archived the conversation and deleted her number. Not out of coldness, out of necessity. She was a reminder of the worst chapter, and I couldn't keep rereading it. Gloria never spoke to me again. I don't blame her. Loving your child doesn't require liking what they've done, but it does require choosing them, and she chose. I sold the grill. The one I'd been standing at when Derek called. It was a good grill, but every time I looked at it, I heard that weighted pause before he said her name. I booked a trip to Montana. Solo. No Vegas, no beach resort, no performative post-divorce reinvention. Just mountains, cold air, and the kind of silence that doesn't have weight to it, the kind that's just silence. The man who never wanted to play dirty walked away having outplayed everyone. And the woman who guaranteed I'd come begging by Monday learned something that should have been obvious from the start. No one is untouchable. Especially not the people who are certain they are.
Story 2.
My wife's brother moved in with us 3 months ago. Except he wasn't her brother, and he wasn't gay. And everything I thought I knew about the woman I married was a lie she'd been building since before our first date. So here's the short version. My wife convinced me to take in her supposedly disowned brother who was fresh out of rehab. Turns out he was actually her drug addict boyfriend she never broke up with, and she fabricated an entire family backstory, conservative parents, a painful estrangement, all of it just to keep this man close while married to me. I'm 32 male. My wife is Renee, 28, and genuinely one of the sharpest people I've ever met, which makes all of this worse. The man she moved into our home is Marco, 27, and her parents, Gerald and Diane, are the warm, lovely people Renee told me she'd been disowned by. They hadn't disowned anyone. They didn't even know Marco existed. Let me back up to where this started, because the lie didn't begin with Marco moving in. It began on our second date. Renee told me about her family over cheap pasta at a place that doesn't exist anymore. She said her parents were deeply conservative, the kind who monitored her phone until she was 20, who refused to let her study out of state, who saw any deviation from their plan as betrayal. She said she'd clawed her way out, moved cities, cut contact, built herself from nothing. I remember sitting across from her thinking, times this woman is extraordinary. Asterisk. She told me her younger brother had come out as gay and her parents had disowned him completely, changed the locks, removed his photos. She said she'd tried to intervene and they'd cut her off too. She cried telling me this. Real tears, or what I believed were real tears. Her voice cracked in the right places. Her hands shook holding her wine glass. I fell in love with her courage before I fell in love with her. We married 14 months later. Her family didn't attend the wedding. I never questioned it. Why would I? The story was airtight. She had a stepbrother named Ryan from Gerald's first marriage, and she'd mentioned him exactly twice in passing enough to establish he existed, never enough for me to dig. I realize now she rationed every detail like someone managing inventory. Then 3 months ago, she told me her brother had finally gone to rehab. She said he'd reached out. She said he had nowhere to go. She asked if we could take him in temporarily, just until he got stable. His name was Marco. I said yes because I loved her, and because I thought I was helping someone she loved. Marco arrived with a duffel bag and the kind of exhaustion that made him look 10 years older than 27. He was polite, quiet, grateful. He called me man a lot. He slept on our pull-out couch and did the dishes without being asked. But things didn't sit right almost immediately. The first thing was the name. Renee's last name before marriage was Bellamy. Her parents were the Bellamys. Marco's last name, which I saw on a piece of mail that arrived for him in our mailbox the second week, was Reyes. I asked Renee about it casually. She said he'd legally changed it after the disownment wanted nothing to do with the family name. I nodded. Filed it away. The second thing was the whispering. They whispered constantly. In the kitchen when I was in the living room. On the balcony when I was showering. Once I came home early and they were sitting on the couch with a gap between them that looked recently manufactured, like two magnets pulled apart by a third hand. Marco stood up too fast. Renee smiled too wide. The third thing was that Marco never talked about the family. Not once. A man supposedly disowned by his parents, freshly sober, living in his sister's apartment, and he never mentioned them. Never said their names. Never expressed anger or grief, or anything at all about the people who'd supposedly destroyed his life. I posted about it online. Anonymous, vague. Just the broad strokes, wife's brother living with us, different surname, weird energy, constant private conversations. The responses split into two camps. Half said I was paranoid. The other half sent me links to threads I wish I'd never read. Wives who'd moved lovers into the family home disguised as cousins, brothers, old college friends. The playbook was almost standardized. Fabricate a sympathetic backstory. Exploit the husband's empathy. Install the other man under his roof. I read those threads for 4 hours. My hands were steady the entire time. Something in me had already known. I started building my case quietly. I asked Marco if he'd be willing to put together a resume so I could help him find work. He agreed. The resume listed his education, his work history, his full legal name, Marco Antonio Reyes. No mention of Bellamy. No name change documentation. The timeline of his employment showed continuous residence in a city 4 hours from Renee's hometown. He hadn't grown up where she grew up. He hadn't grown up in her family at all. That weekend, I told Renee I had a work trip near her hometown. I suggested she come along so we could visit her parents. I framed it casually already, knowing she'd refuse proximity to her actual parents. It was the one variable she couldn't control, so it was easier for her to say no. As expected, she said she was busy, but she kept asking me if I would be visiting her parents. I said no, I won't visit them alone. We can plan for the next time. In reality, I had no work trip. I went to her hometown only to meet her parents and uncover her truth. I don't want to get into the details of how I sourced their address. It was on her ID. So I went to their house and immediately told them not to reveal this to Renee because I was planning a surprise for her. Renee's birthday was around the corner a day after tomorrow. So I told them that I was arranging a surprise party for Renee and went there to invite them in person. They were pleased to receive me. Gerald shook my hand with both of his. Diane hugged me in the doorway. Their home was warm, cluttered with family photos, and nothing times about these people suggested the cold, controlling fundamentalists Renee had described. While speaking to them, I eventually opened up and told them that they don't seem conservative at all, not the way Renee had described. Gerald's face changed. Diane set down her tea. Conservative, Gerald said. We begged that girl to stay. I asked about their son. Gerald said, Ryan's in Seattle. We talk every Sunday. I asked carefully if they had another son, a younger one, named Marco. They looked at each other, then back at me. Who, Diane said slowly, is Marco. I drove back to the hotel that night with every window down 80 miles an hour on an empty highway, and the only thought cycling through my head was this. Right now in my apartment, in the home I pay for, Renee and Marco are alone together. And they know exactly what they are to each other. Her birthday was in 2 days, and her parents had just accepted my invitation. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of anger. Anger would have been simpler. I lay in that hotel bed running the math on every conversation, every tear, every perfectly rationed detail she'd fed me over 3 years, and what kept me awake was the precision. This wasn't impulsive. This was architecture. I drove home the next morning, one day before her birthday. Marco was eating cereal at the kitchen counter, and Renee was blow-drying her hair in the bathroom. Everything looked normal. Everything had always looked normal. That was the craft of it. How was the trip, she asked when I kissed her cheek. Productive, I said. Actually, I want to do something special for your birthday tomorrow. Stay home. I'll handle everything. She smiled. The same smile from our second date, the one I'd once mistaken for vulnerability. You don't have to do all that. I want to, I said. I really want to. I spent that day in a kind of surgical calm. I bought a cake. I ordered flowers. I texted Gerald and Diane the address and the time 6 o'clock come straight up the door would be open. Diane sent back a string of heart emojis and wrote that she couldn't wait to see her baby girl. I stared at that message for a long time. These people loved Renee. They had never stopped. She had invented their cruelty the way a novelist invents weather to set the scene for a character who doesn't exist. The morning of her birthday, Renee woke up happy. She stretched across the bed and pulled me toward her and said, 30 looks good on me, don't you think I told her it did? Marco knocked on the bedroom door and wished her happy birthday through the wood. She laughed. I watched the ease between them, the familiarity that I'd once read as sibling comfort, and I saw it clearly now. The way her voice softened half a register when she spoke to him. The way his knock was gentle, almost intimate, 2 taps instead of 3. I told her I was handling dinner. She should relax, get dressed up, enjoy the day. She spent the afternoon doing her makeup while Marco sat on the couch scrolling his phone. At one point I walked past and he looked up at me with those tired eyes and said, "This is really cool of you, man." "Family's important," I said. He nodded. He had no idea what he was nodding to. By 5:30, Renee was in a green dress, her hair pinned up, standing in the kitchen, finishing a salad she'd insisted on making because she said she couldn't just contribute nothing. Marco had changed into a clean shirt. The apartment smelled like garlic and candle wax and the ordinary machinery of a life that had never been real. At 5:58, my phone buzzed. Gerald times. We're in the lobby. Asterisk. I told Renee I'd forgotten something in the car and went downstairs. Gerald was wearing a blazer. Diane was holding a wrapped gift with a bow that looked like she'd spent an hour on it. I shook Gerald's hand, hugged Diane, and led them to the elevator. "She's going to be so surprised," Diane whispered. "Yes," I said. "She is." I opened the apartment door and stepped aside. Diane walked in first. Then Gerald. The hallway opens directly into the kitchen and living room, one continuous space, and Renee was standing at the counter with a knife in one hand and a tomato in the other, and Marco was 3 feet away leaning against the fridge. Diane said, "Baby?" Renee's head turned. The knife stopped. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes went from her mother to her father to me, and I watched the blood leave her face in real time like someone had pulled a plug at the base of her throat. Gerald stepped forward, arms open, and then he saw Marco. He stopped. His arms lowered. "What are you doing here?" Gerald said. Not to Renee, to Marco. Marco straightened. His mouth opened. Closed. "You know each other," I said. I already knew, but I needed the room to hear it. "That's Marco Reyes," Gerald said, his voice flattening into something I hadn't heard from him before. "He's the reason we almost lost our daughter." Renee set the knife down. Her hands were shaking. "Dad, let me." "He's been living here," I said, "for 3 months. Renee told me he was your son, that you disowned him for being gay." The silence that followed had texture. Diane's gift hit the floor. Gerald turned to Renee with an expression I can only describe as a man watching something he built catch fire. "Oh," I said, "Ryan didn't come." "It would have made things easier, isn't it?" Renee flinched, like I'd struck her. Gerald crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, grabbed Marco by the collar of his clean shirt, and dragged him toward the door. Marco didn't resist. He went limp the way someone goes limp when they've always known this moment was coming. Gerald shoved him into the hallway and pointed at the elevator and said something quiet I couldn't hear, and Marco walked away without looking back. Diane was crying. Renee was standing in her green birthday dress in the kitchen she'd been cooking in 2 minutes ago, and she looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw her without a story prepared. "How long?" she whispered. "Long enough," I said. The divorce took 11 weeks. She signed everything without contest. No negotiation, no lawyers jousting over assets. She showed up to the finalization alone, thinner, wearing no makeup. She didn't look at me. Gerald removed her from the family will. I know this because Diane called me 3 weeks after it was finalized, sobbing into the phone. She said Marco had relapsed. She said Renee was still with him. She said she didn't understand how her daughter, her brilliant, sharp, capable daughter, could throw away everything for a man who couldn't stay clean for 6 consecutive months. I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't. What I keep coming back to is this. Renee built an entire mythology. Cold parents, a disowned brother, a woman who'd clawed her way to freedom, and she built it so well that I married the character, not the person. Every detail measured, every tear placed. The woman I admired for her resilience was real, in a way I hadn't understood. She was times resilient. She maintained a lie across years, across a marriage, across the daily architecture of a shared life without a single crack I could see until a piece of mail arrived with the wrong name. That's not weakness. That's a kind of terrifying talent. And she spent all of it on Marco Reyes, a man who the last I heard was sleeping on someone's floor. I think about that sometimes. How the sharpest person I've ever known made the dumbest choice I've ever seen and made it over and over and over again and called it love.
Story 3.
My husband ordered a paternity test on our son. Not because he had doubts, because his mommy told him to. And that right there is the sentence that ended my marriage. So here's the short version. My mother-in-law spent 2 years implying my toddler wasn't her son's kid. Instead of shutting it down, my husband ordered the test to keep the peace. The results confirmed what everyone with eyes already knew. But by the time they came back, I'd already filed for divorce, found an apartment, and invited the whole family over for one last dinner they'll never forget. I'm 32. My soon-to-be ex-husband is Marcus. Our son is 2, I call him my little gremlin, and he's the only man in this story worth fighting for. Then there's Diane, my mother-in-law, the woman who turned suspicion into a sport. And Gerald, my father-in-law, who I'm pretty sure hasn't spoken a full sentence since 2019. Let me tell you about the slow death of a marriage because it didn't start with a paternity test. It started with a casserole dish. 3 weeks after our wedding, Diane showed up unannounced with a tuna casserole and a suggestion that I might want to learn Marcus's favorites before he starts eating elsewhere. She said it with a smile. She said everything with a smile. That's the thing about Diane. She never raised her voice, never cursed, never did anything that would look bad if you described it to someone else. She just eroded you, like water on limestone. Drip, drip, drip. And one day you look down and there's a canyon where your self-respect used to be. Marcus's response that night, she's just trying to help, babe. She doesn't mean anything by it. That became the refrain of my marriage. She doesn't mean anything by it. She's just old-fashioned. She's just protective. She's just worried. She's just being a mom. You know what? I was just being his wife. When I got pregnant, I made the mistake of thinking it would bring us closer. It did, just not me and Marcus. Him and Diane. She was at every appointment she could weasel her way into. She had opinions about my diet, my exercise, my decision to keep working until month 8. When I said I wanted my own mother in the delivery room, Diane didn't speak to Marcus for 11 days. 11. He counted. And on day 12, he asked me gently, carefully, like he was defusing a bomb if maybe both mothers could be there. I said fine. Because I was still saying fine back then. My gremlin came out looking exactly like Marcus. Same nose, same ridiculous ears, same dimple on the left cheek that makes you forgive them for everything. I remember Diane holding him in the hospital, studying his face like she was running forensic analysis and saying, well, he's got your complexion. She said it to me. Not to Marcus, to me. My son is lighter skinned than Marcus. That's it. That's the whole conspiracy. My son inherited more of my coloring, and Diane decided that was evidence of something. The comment started small. Who does he look like on your side? Are those your brother's eyes? Funny how genetics work, isn't it? Always in front of other people. Always light enough to sound like small talk if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. The first time I told Marcus, it bothered me. He rubbed my shoulders and said she was just an excited grandmother trying to see family resemblance. The 5th time, he sighed and said he'd talk to her. The 10th time, he snapped and told me I was being sensitive. By the 20th time, I'd stopped counting and started something worse. I'd stopped caring what he thought about it. There's a moment in every dying marriage that you can point to later and say, that's when I knew. Mine happened on a Tuesday. The gremlin was 18 months old. We were at Diane and Gerald's house for dinner. Gerald was doing what Gerald does, existing quietly in his recliner, a man so thoroughly absorbed into his wife's personality that I sometimes forgot he had one. Diane was bouncing my son on her knee, and she looked up at Marcus and said, you know, sweetheart, you really should consider one of those DNA tests, just for peace of mind. They sell them at the pharmacy now. She said it like she was recommending a vitamin. I looked at Marcus. He was cutting his steak. His knife paused for maybe half a second. Then he kept cutting. That half-second pause. That's what killed us. Not the test. Not Diane. That pause where he considered it weighted against the cost of confronting his mother and decided the steak was more interesting. I didn't say a word in the car ride home. Marcus filled the silence himself. She's just old school, you know. In her generation, people talk like that. She doesn't mean. If you finish that sentence, I said, I will open this car door at 60 miles an hour. He didn't finish the sentence. 6 months passed. The comments didn't stop. They got braver. Diane started making them directly to me when Marcus left the room, which meant she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't confused. She wasn't old-fashioned. She was testing fences. Then came the evening Marcus sat on the edge of our bed while I was folding laundry. He had that look, the one where his jaw goes tight and he rubs the back of his neck like he's working up to something. I knew that look. It usually preceded a request to visit his parents. So I've been thinking, he said. I kept folding. Maybe we should just do the test. The DNA thing. I sat down a onesie. Slowly. Not because I think I times no times he's mine. Obviously. But if we just do it, she'll see the results and she'll stop. It'll shut her up for good. He looked at me like he'd just proposed something reasonable. Like he'd found the solution. His eyes were almost hopeful. I smiled at him. I actually smiled. Because something behind my ribs quietly snapped, and the sound it made was so clean, so final, that it felt almost like relief. Sure, I said. Order it. He blinked. Really? Really? He exhaled, shoulders dropping. Thank you. Seriously. This is going to fix everything. I picked up the onesie and kept folding. The next morning I called a divorce attorney before my coffee was cold, and I started planning a dinner party. The test results arrived on a Thursday. I know because I'd been tracking the shipment like a woman tracking a hurricane, not because I was nervous about what it would say, but because I needed to know when to set the table. I told Marcus to invite his parents for dinner Saturday evening. He thought it was a peace offering. He actually kissed my forehead and said, "See, this is going to be good for everyone." I let him believe that. I let him believe a lot of things that week. I was warmer than I'd been in months, attentive, easy, laughing at his jokes. He probably thought we were healing. What we were doing was hospice. Saturday morning, while the gremlin napped and Marcus ran to the store for wine, I laid the divorce papers on our bed. Filed, dated, flagged with those little colored tabs the attorney uses. When he came home and went to change his shirt, I heard the bag hit the floor from the kitchen. He came downstairs holding them like they were written in a language he didn't speak. What is this? Read the tabs. I can see what it... Are you serious right now? Your parents will be here in 2 hours. I need you to ask your mother to apologize when they arrive. For all of it. Every comment, every insinuation, every time she looked at our son like he was evidence. A real apology. And then we get done with this. Marcus set the papers on the counter. His hand was shaking, but his voice went flat the way it always does when he's trying to control a room he's already lost. You're not filing for divorce over a DNA test. I'm not filing over the test, Marcus. I'm filing over you. He stared at me. I watched something rearrange behind his eyes, confusion giving way to the first real fear I'd seen on his face since the delivery room. I'm not signing these. Listen, I don't need you to sign it to get a divorce. It would only make things complicated. That's it. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Diane is always punctual. It's one of the few things about her I respected. She came in wearing her church pearls, which meant she considered this a formal occasion. Gerald followed in her wake, nodding at me the way he always did a man acknowledging weather. Marcus had the test results in an envelope on the dining table. He hadn't opened them. I think he wanted witnesses. We didn't even make it to the salad. Marcus opened the envelope, read it, and set it down. He's mine. Obviously. His voice cracked on the second word. Diane picked up the paper. Read it. Set it down. Her face didn't change. Not one muscle. And that's when I understood something I should have understood years ago. She had never actually believed the baby wasn't his. The accusation was never about DNA. It was about territory. It was about making sure I knew that in this family she outranked me. Marcus turned to her. Mom. You owe her an apology. Diane straightened her pearls. For what? For all of it. The comments, the suggestions. You made her feel, I have nothing to apologize for. Her voice was Sunday sermon steady. I wouldn't apologize for having suspicions. I didn't accuse her of anything. She looked at me then. Directly. The way she always looked at me when Marcus left the room, except this time she didn't bother waiting for him to leave. And you can leave if you want to. So that's that. Gerald studied his hands. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The gremlin babbled from his high chair, smacking a spoon against the tray, the only person in the room who didn't understand what was collapsing. I stood up, calmly, picked up my son, went upstairs and started packing a bag. I could hear them below. Marcus's voice rising for the first time in his life, not at me, not for me, but because the floor had finally dropped out and he was grabbing at whatever was closest. He eventually told his parents he'll be coming over from time to check up on them. He is their only child. And not to bother coming over anymore until she apologizes. She wasn't amused. She told me, called it up the stairs because Diana's always had excellent projection that I'm taking her son away and that some female prostitute would replace me and raise my child. She used the word times, prostitute times, like she was ordering from a menu. I zipped the bag. I left that night because I wasn't going to get an apology. And Marcus didn't seem to understand that him reinforcing for years that it's okay for her to meddle is why I wanted a divorce in the first place. The test was just the last strip. The canyon was already there. It took Marcus 9 days to call about couples counseling. Not because he had some revelation about what kind of husband he'd been, not because he suddenly saw me clearly. He called because he'd spent 9 days in a house without the gremlin's morning babbling, without the weight of a small body falling asleep on his chest, and the silence broke him in a way I never could. I said yes. Not because I believe it'll work, but because I believe in being thorough, and when the gremlin is old enough to ask why, I want to say I tried everything. The counselor asked me in our first session what I wanted from Marcus. Respect, I said, and if he shows you that I thought about it. Really thought about it? Searched every room inside myself for the part that used to love him, the part that said time's fine, time's to everything, the part that folded his laundry while her heart was being autopsied. Then I'll feel it, or I won't. The divorce takes 20 days if I need it to. I'm on day 14. The clock is running, and for the first time in this marriage, I'm the one deciding what happens when it stops.
Story 4.
I took a handmade gift off my brother-in-law's desk while he was at lunch and left a note telling him exactly why. My wife Lena spent over 60 hours crocheting a bridal shawl for her older brother George's wedding. A family tradition. Their mother Vivian guilt-tripped her into continuing, despite the fact that George made her childhood a living nightmare. The moment that shawl was in their hands, his fiancée Diane called Lena to uninvite her from the wedding. Venue capacity, apparently. Funny how there was still a seat for me, though. So here's the cast. I'm a guy in my early 30s. My wife is Lena, her older brother is George, and his now wife is Diane. Their mother is Vivian. Then there's Lena's other brother Michael and his wife Sarah, who are basically the only decent people in this family. Let me start from the beginning because this goes way deeper than a shawl. Lena doesn't talk about her childhood the way most people do. There are no funny anecdotes about sibling rivalries or eye-rolling stories about family holidays. When she talks about growing up, which is rare, she speaks in small, careful sentences like someone walking through a room full of broken glass and bare feet. I learned the full picture in pieces over the years. George is 4 years older than Michael, and Michael is 2 years older than Lena. From the time Lena could walk, George decided she was beneath him, not in the way older brothers sometimes dismiss younger sisters. In the deliberate, systematic way a person dismantles someone they view as competition for resources they believe belong exclusively to them. He broke her things, told her she was adopted, locked her in closets during family gatherings, and told Vivian she'd gone to bed on her own. When George graduated high school, Lena wasn't brought to the ceremony. She was 9 years old, left home with a babysitter while the rest of the family celebrated. At Christmas, she was routinely sent to her room when George complained that she was annoying him. Vivian complied every single time. Every single time. Michael told me once, his voice tight with something between guilt and rage, that he used to sneak food up to Lena's room on Christmas evening because Vivian wouldn't call her down for dinner if George was in a mood. He was 11 smuggling turkey and potatoes up the stairs to his little sister like she was a prisoner in her own house. And Vivian. Vivian is the kind of mother who will tell you she loves all her children equally while standing on one child's neck to give the other a boost. George was the golden boy. Michael was tolerable. Lena was the afterthought, useful when needed, invisible when not. So when Vivian called Lena 3 months before George's wedding and told her the family tradition required a hand-crocheted bridal shawl for Diane, I watched my wife's face do the thing it always does. The slight freeze, the micro-flinch around her eyes, and then the smile. The automatic survival-trained smile that says, "Times of course, Mom, I'd love to." Asterisk. I waited until she hung up before I said anything. You don't have to do this. It's tradition. Mom made one for Sarah. Her mom made one for her, Lena. It's George's wedding. She was already pulling up yarn suppliers on her phone. I won't have to see him. You can drop it off at work. That was the compromise. George and I work at the same company, different teams now, but at the time, we were on the same one. I'd have moved when George was first put on my team, but Lena encouraged me not to, as she didn't want me to rock the boat with her family. So I'd been white-knuckling through shared meetings and break room encounters with a man I genuinely despised for the better part of a year. The plan was simple. I'd leave the shawl on his desk, say something brief, walk away. Lena would never have to be in the same room as him. She worked on that shawl every night for 2 months. I'd come downstairs at midnight and find her on the couch, fingers moving through ivory lace thread, some tutorial playing on her laptop. She pricked her fingers raw. She frogged entire sections and started over because a single stitch was off. 63 hours. I know because she tracked it, not out of resentment, but because she tracks all her projects. She's meticulous like that. She cares about things with her whole body, even when the people she's caring for don't deserve a single stitch. The morning I delivered it, I set the wrap box on George's desk while he was in a meeting. I ran into him in the hallway on my way back. "Lena finished the shawl," I said. "It's on your desk. She put a lot of work into it. We're looking forward to the wedding." George nodded like I told him the printer was fixed. "Cool. Thanks." That was it. "Cool. Thanks." 63 hours of his sister's hands, and he gave it less acknowledgement than a coffee refill. 4 hours later, Lena called me at work. Her voice had that particular flatness I've learned to dread, the one that means she's holding herself together with both hands. Diane just called. My stomach dropped. What did she say? They're over capacity at the venue. They need to cut the guest list. So, I'm uninvited. I didn't speak for a long time. I could hear her breathing. "But you're still invited," she added quietly. Diane made sure to mention that. I stared across the open plan office at George's desk. He wasn't there. But the box was gone. The shawl was already in their possession. They had waited with surgical, calculated patience until the gift was physically extracted before making the call. Not to me, to Lena. Directly to the woman they knew wouldn't fight back. They waited, I said, mostly to myself. It's fine. It's just a wedding. It wasn't fine. It was never fine. It was the Christmas dinner she ate alone in her bedroom. It was the graduation she wasn't brought to. It was 30 years of a family teaching her that her only value was what she could produce for them, and the moment the production was complete, she could be discarded. I stood up from my desk. I walked across the floor to George's section. His chair was empty. His jacket was gone, long lunch probably. And there, draped across the back of his chair like it meant nothing, was the shawl. Unwrapped, not folded, just tossed there, ivory lace pooling on a cheap office chair. I picked it up. I folded it carefully the way Lena would have. Then I pulled a sticky note from George's desk, uncapped a pen, and started writing. Asterisk. Since Lena is no longer invited the shawl, and I won't be attending either. My name, asterisk. I pressed the sticky note to the center of his monitor, tucked the folded shawl under my arm, and walked back to my desk. My hands were steady. My pulse was not. I didn't call Lena right away. I sat with the shawl in my lap for 10 minutes, running my thumb over the stitches she'd spent 63 hours perfecting, and I thought about an 11-year-old boy smuggling turkey up a staircase to his little sister on Christmas night. I thought about a 9-year-old girl sitting in a quiet house while her family cheered for the brother who locked her in closets. Then the group chat detonated. Vivian fired first times. That shawl was a gift. You don't take back gifts? This is beyond petty. Asterisk. George, 15 minutes later. Times. Tell your husband to stay in his lane. This is family business. Asterisk. Diane times. We tried to handle this gracefully. Venue limitations are real. This is incredibly childish. Asterisk. My phone buzzed 11 times in 20 minutes. I read every message. Then I typed one of my own. Asterisk. This is Lena's husband. Lena didn't take the shawl back. I did. She doesn't know yet. When she finds out, she'll probably want me to return it because that's who she is, someone who gives and gives even when people take without thanking her. I'm not returning it. The shawl took 63 hours. You waited until it was in your hands to uninvite the woman who made it. That wasn't a capacity issue. That was a transaction. I'd do it again. Asterisk. I put my phone face down on my desk. When I got home, Lena was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up. She'd seen the group chat. You took it back, she said? Not a question. You shouldn't have done that. Probably not. They're going to... I don't care what they're going to do. She pressed her forehead into her knees. I should just make another one. I can finish it in time if I... Lena. No, it's easier for times them asterisk. It has always been easier for them. She went quiet. I sat down next to her but didn't touch her. She needed space to think without someone else's hands telling her what to feel. My phone rang. Michael, I saw the group chat, he said. His voice had that tight quality I'd heard before, the sound of a man who'd spent his childhood watching something terrible happen and never had enough power to stop it. The venue excuse is garbage. I called the venue coordinator last week to confirm dietary requirements. They're at 68 of 90 capacity. George has been under for weeks. I closed my eyes. Say that again? 68 of 90. They had room. They always had room. I related to Lena. She didn't cry. She did something worse. She nodded slowly, like a person confirming something they'd always known but had never been allowed to say out loud. It was never about the venue, she whispered. No, I said. It was never about the venue. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. I didn't push. I didn't argue. I asked questions and I listened. At the end of it, Lena picked up her phone, left the family group chat, and deleted it. Then she blocked George's number. Then Diane's. She held her thumb over Vivian's contact for a long time. She's my mother, she said. She is. Lena blocked the number. The next morning, I went to my manager. I told him the situation, not all of it, but enough. I said I'd taken the shawl because George could make things difficult for me, but that he would have done exactly the same thing because George is a nightmare. I told him that I'd like to move to another team because it wasn't good for Lena to have to be around him. He told me to leave it with him and he would see what he could do. I heard back on Monday that I will be getting moved to another team at the end of the week. This other team is desperate for someone, so when my manager reached out to other managers to see if anyone had an internal vacancy, the manager bit his arm off. The day of the wedding, Michael called Lena and asked what her plans had been for the day. Michael and Sarah drove 2 hours to spend the afternoon with us. Sarah brought wine. Michael brought takeout from the Thai place Lena loves. We ate on our back porch. Sarah took a photo of the four of us, nothing posed, just mid-laugh, Lena leaning into my shoulder with noodles on her fork. Michael posted it that evening. No caption. No explanation needed. George, according to mutual friends, had a meltdown during his own reception when someone asked where his sister was. Apparently, Diane had to pull him outside. I'd like to say I felt nothing, but that would be a lie. I felt satisfied. Quietly, deeply satisfied. The shawl sat in our closet for 2 weeks. Then one Saturday morning, I came downstairs and found Lena at the kitchen table with a basin of indigo dye and the ivory lace submerged in it. What are you doing? Making it mine. She lifted it out, dripping deep blue, and held it up to the morning light. 63 hours of her hands transformed. No longer a gift for someone who never deserved it. Something entirely hers. She draped it over her shoulders, still damp, and looked at me. How does it look? Like it was always supposed to be yours? She smiled. Not the automatic survival smile. A real one. Small and new and hard won, like the first green thing pushing through concrete.
Story 5.
My husband let his sister turn my dead baby's nursery into her baby shower venue. And when I broke down crying in front of a room full of strangers, she looked me in the eye and said, "It's not her fault I couldn't produce a child." So let me walk you through how I went from opening my home to a pregnant, abandoned girl out of the goodness of my grieving heart, to being treated like a maid in the house I paid for, to watching my marriage of 8 years disintegrate in a single weekend. I'm 29 female. My husband is Marcus. We lost 2 pregnancies, the last one at 31 weeks. His younger sister is Leah. She's 20, and she showed up at our door sobbing, pregnant, and completely alone. And my mother is Diane, who I hadn't spoken to in a long time, but ended up being the only person who showed up for me when everything fell apart. The first thing you need to understand is the nursery. I built it during my second pregnancy, the one that made it to 31 weeks. The one where we had a name picked out, a coming home outfit washed in fragrance-free detergent, a car seat installed by a fire station technician who shook Marcus's hand and said, "Congratulations." I painted the walls myself, a sage green that took me 4 trips to the hardware store to get right. I assembled the crib at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, because my belly was so big and my heart was so full, and I thought foolishly that preparing hard enough could protect us. After we lost her, I closed the door. Marcus never opened it. I never opened it. It just existed at the end of the hallway like a sealed wound, and we walked past it every day and said nothing, and somehow that was how we grieved. Separately, silently. In a house I bought with my inheritance before we even got married, that context matters for what comes next. Leah showed up on a Thursday night in March. Mascara streaked down to her jaw. 1 duffel bag. 5 months pregnant. Her boyfriend had kicked her out, changed the locks, and blocked her number while she was at a doctor's appointment. Their parents, Marcus's and Leah's, had been out of the picture for years, which is a longer story I won't get into, but the short version is that Leah had no one. Literally no one. And I looked at this girl standing on my porch, 20 years old pregnant, shaking, and I saw every nightmare I'd ever had about being alone during the worst moment of your life. So I pulled her inside. I made her chamomile tea. I sat with her on the couch while she sobbed into a throw pillow, and when she finally fell asleep, I covered her with a blanket and whispered to Marcus in the kitchen times, "She stays as long as she needs." Asterisk. He cried, hugged me so hard my ribs ached, told me I was the most generous person he'd ever known. I want you to remember he said that. The first 2 weeks were genuinely beautiful. Leah and I bonded in a way I didn't expect. We'd stay up late eating mint chocolate chip ice cream straight from the carton, talking about everything. Her fears about being a single mom, my grief, the weird and terrible and sacred thing that pregnancy is. She'd rest her head on my shoulder and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I believed her. I think she even meant it then. The shift was so gradual, I almost can't pinpoint when it started. Week 3, Leah stopped doing her dishes. Not a big deal. She was tired, she was pregnant, I got it, I washed them. Week 4, her clothes migrated from the guest room to every surface in the living room, bras on the couch, socks on the kitchen counter, wet towels on the hardwood. I mentioned it gently. She said her back hurt and she'd get to it. She didn't get to it. Week 5, she asked me to do her laundry. Not asked, told. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling her phone and said without looking up, "Can you throw my stuff in? I'm the pregnant one, so..." That so did a lot of heavy lifting. I did the laundry. I started labeling my food in the fridge because entire meals I'd prepped for the week would vanish overnight. I'd open the fridge Monday morning and find my containers empty, not even rinsed, stacked back on the shelf like a taunt. When I brought it up, Leah said she had cravings and couldn't control them. Marcus said, "She's pregnant, babe. Just buy more." Asterisk. She's pregnant. Asterisk. Those 2 words became the lock on every conversation. Leah left hair in the shower drain. She's pregnant. Leah took over the living room TV for 12 hours a day. She's pregnant. Leah snapped at me for vacuuming too loudly at noon. On a Saturday, she's times pregnant. Asterisk. And I kept swallowing it. Because I knew what it felt like to be pregnant and terrified. Because I knew what it felt like to lose that. Because some broken part of me believed that if I could just take care of this girl and this baby, maybe the universe would notice. Maybe it would count for something. Marcus, meanwhile, was becoming someone I didn't recognize. He hovered over Leah, constantly drove her to every appointment, assembled a registry with her, talked about the baby with an excitement I hadn't seen since we'd lost ours. It hit me one night watching them huddle over her phone, picking out stroller colors that he wasn't helping his sister. He was reliving something, replacing something, and he couldn't see it because he'd never once sat with his grief long enough to look it in the face. By week 7, I was cleaning the house I owned like it was someone else's, cooking meals that got eaten without thanks, doing laundry that wasn't mine, sleeping next to a man who hadn't asked me how I was in over a month. Then one morning, Leah knocked on our bedroom door and said she wanted to talk about the baby shower. She said she wanted to have it here at the house. She said she'd already picked a date. And she said she had the perfect room in mind for the gifts and the main setup. My stomach dropped before she even finished the sentence. She was looking right at me when she said it. Right at me when she pointed down the hallway toward the closed door at the end. I said no. I said it clearly standing in the hallway with my coffee going cold in my hands, and I watched Leah's face cycle through surprise, confusion, and something harder underneath something that looked like calculation. "It's just sitting there," she said. "It's not being used." I said, "No, Leah." Marcus appeared behind me. I felt him before I saw him, his hand on my shoulder, his voice already tuned to that frequency. I'd come to dread gentle, reasonable, designed to make me feel like the problem. "Babe, maybe we could just..." And that was supposed to be the end of it. The baby shower was scheduled for a Saturday. Leah told me she'd moved it to a friend's apartment. She said it casually, almost sweetly, and I felt a wash of relief so strong it made me dizzy. I offered to help set up. She said no, she had it handled. She left that morning with Marcus, who was driving her, and I stood in my quiet house and breathed for what felt like the first time in weeks. I took a bath. I made lunch. I read 40 pages of a novel I'd started before any of this. At around 3 o'clock, I heard the front door open and the unmistakable sound of a crowd. Voices, laughter. A dozen people, maybe more, streaming into my living room with gift bags and balloons. Leah, in the center of it all, radiant, one hand on her belly, the other gesturing people inside like she owned the place. I came downstairs in sweatpants and wet hair. "What is this?" "The venue fell through," Leah said brightly. "Last minute. You don't mind, right?" "I mind it." but there were 15 strangers in my living room already unwrapping paper plates, and Marcus was setting up a speaker on my kitchen counter, and the social pressure of it was so perfectly engineered that I just stood there. Then I heard footsteps above me. Not one set, several. Going up my stairs, down my hallway, toward the closed door. I moved so fast I knocked a gift bag off the banister. I took the stairs 2 at a time and turned the corner, and the door was open. The door was times open, asterisk. The sage green walls, the crib I'd assembled at 2 in the morning. The mobile with the little wooden stars I'd picked because they reminded me of the night sky the week we found out we were having a girl. All of it flooded with light and strangers. Someone had hung a banner across the crib. Asterisk. Welcome Baby Times in gold glitter script, taped directly to the wood I'd sanded by hand. A woman I'd never met was holding up a onesie against the crib rail cooing. Another was taking photos. There were gift bags piled on the changing table where I'd stacked diapers we never used. Oh my God, this setup is Times Adorable Times, someone said. Leah, did you do all this? And Leah, standing in the doorway behind me, smiled. The sound that came out of me wasn't a scream. It was lower than that, more animal. I grabbed the banner and ripped it down so hard the tape took paint with it, and the room went silent, and I turned to face all of them, with my dead daughter's name caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. Get out. Everyone, get out of this room Times now, asterisk. They scattered. Leah didn't move. She stood in the doorframe with her arms crossed beneath her belly, and her face had that expression I'd been too generous to name for weeks. Contempt dressed up as inconvenience. You're embarrassing yourself, she said. This was my daughter's room. You Times knew Times that. It's not my fault you couldn't produce a child. She said it flatly, like a fact, like weather. Why let all this go to waste? I looked past her for Marcus. He was at the end of the hallway. He'd heard everything. I could see it in the way he wouldn't lift his eyes. Marcus. Tell her to leave. Nothing. Marcus. Asterisk. Choose. Asterisk. His mouth opened. Closed. He looked at Leah's belly, then at the floor, and the silence lasted 3 seconds, but I felt every year of our marriage collapse inside it. Both of you get out of my house. They left that night. Leah called me a psycho from the driveway. Marcus carried her bags to his car without a word. He came back the next morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee I hadn't touched, still wearing the same sweatpants, and he walked in with his key like nothing had detonated 12 hours earlier. He started apologizing, telling me he wanted to make it right. I told him I just needed time away from him. Then he threw it in my face. Well, it's not my fault you lost our children. Maybe this would have never happened. My sister was right. You are selfish. I have never times made my husband feel like he cannot grieve with me. Never made him feel less than because of his pain. I carried that grief like a shared organ carefully, reverently, even when he refused to touch his half. I turned around and slapped him in the face. I never condone such behavior, and I'm very upset I would ever do that to another human. But I just couldn't deal with this. He took a step back and threw all of my makeup on the floor. Which I get, reaction, adrenaline, I just hit him. But then he broke all of my decor in the bathroom. I yelled at him to stop and that I was sorry, but he just kept going and punched a hole in my bathroom wall. Then he left. Peeled out of the driveway. Gone. I sat on the bathroom floor, surrounded by broken glass and shattered ceramic and the dust from drywall, and I called a number I hadn't dialed in 2 years. My mother picked up on the second ring. Mom. That was all I got out. Diane drove 45 minutes and 30. She walked through my front door, found me still on the bathroom floor, and she knelt down and held me. She didn't say it was going to be okay. She didn't ask what happened. She just held me until I stopped shaking. Then she stood up, pulled out her phone, and started photographing every inch of damage. The hole in the wall, the shattered mirror, the makeup ground into the tile. She moved through the house methodically, the nursery door still open, the tape residue on the crib, the banner crumpled on the floor. You're going to need a locksmith, she said, not looking up from her phone. And a lawyer. In that order. The locksmith came at 4. The attorney answered my email by 6. 8 years of marriage ended not because I stopped loving Marcus, but because I finally understood that I had been the only one in that marriage willing to grieve, willing to give, willing to break myself open for other people's comfort. And the moment I needed someone to stand in a hallway and say, times that room is sacred and you will not touch it, times the moment I needed to be chosen even once I was met with silence. I chose myself. It was the first time in years anyone had.
Story 6.
He's the one guy you don't have to worry about. Let me tell you something. If anyone ever says that exact sentence to you, that is the person you need to worry about most. So my wife told me I was the best thing that ever happened to her in mid-March. By the end of March, she was already gone emotionally. By May, she'd signed a lease with another man, planned a whole new life, and looked me dead in my face and said there was no love left, all in about 6 weeks. And when I finally caught her, she told me it wasn't cheating because she asked for the divorce first. I'm 31 male. My wife is Elise, she's 28, and we've been together 7 years. The other guy, Craig, 38 years old, her co-worker, the safe Christian friend who was supposedly just talking about the Bible with her. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without understanding what I thought we were. 7 years. That's not a fling. That's not some situationship you can just walk away from clean. 7 years of building something inside jokes that nobody else would understand, a shorthand language between two people who'd mapped every corner of each other. We bought a house together. We talked about kids with specific names picked out. We had a 5-year plan taped to the refrigerator like a vision board, and every few months we'd check something off with a red marker and feel like we were winning at life. I loved Elise in the way you love someone, when you've never had a reason not to. Completely. Stupidly. Without a single backup plan. She started the new job in early February. Government position, good benefits, the kind of career move we'd talked about for over a year. I drove her to orientation that first Monday and kissed her in the parking lot. She was nervous. I told her she'd crush it. She did. The training cohort was small, maybe 15 people doing 2 weeks of onboarding together. She mentioned Craig by the end of the first week. Not in any way that raised a flag. Just Craig said something funny at lunch, or Craig's been in the field for 12 years, he knows everything. Normal coworker stuff. I didn't think twice. Then the texting started. I'm not someone who monitors phones. Never have been. But when your wife is sitting next to you on the couch at 10 p.m. and her screen is lighting up every 45 seconds, you notice. When she tilts it slightly away from you, not dramatically, not obviously, just slightly time, something in your chest tightens before your brain even catches up. I brought it up the first time casually. You and Craig talk a lot, huh? She barely looked up. He's going through a divorce. I'm just being supportive. We talk about faith stuff mostly. The second time was mid-March. The texting hadn't slowed. If anything, it had escalated. Full conversations happening in real time while I was sitting right there. Elise, I need you to hear me. The volume of this is making me uncomfortable. That's when she hit me with it. She put her phone down, looked at me with these soft, almost pitying eyes and said, "Babe, he's the one guy you don't have to worry about. He's a Christian. We literally talk about scripture. If it bothers you, I'll stop." And here's the trap. She offered to stop times, knowing times I wouldn't ask her to. Because what kind of controlling husband tells his wife she can't have a friend? What kind of insecure man can't handle his wife texting a coworker? She knew exactly who I was. She knew I'd say, "No, it's fine, I trust you." And I did. I said those exact words. 3 days later, 3 days, she sat on my lap in the kitchen, put both hands on my face, and told me I was the best thing that ever happened in her life. I can still feel her palms on my jaw. I can still smell her shampoo. That memory doesn't feel real anymore, like it belongs to someone else's marriage. She left for a month-long training at the end of March. Different city residential program. We'd known about it for months. The first week was fine. FaceTime every night. I miss you, I love you, the usual rhythm of two people who'd done distance before and survived it. The shift happened in week 2. The calls got shorter. Then she started picking fights about things we'd never thought about. Out of nowhere, where do you even see us in 5 years? Do you think we're actually growing? The words didn't sound like her. They had a cadence I didn't recognize, like she was quoting someone else's therapy homework. I asked if she was okay. She said she needed space to think. Space to think? My stomach dropped through the floor, but I gave it to her. Because that's what a good partner does, right? Respects, boundaries. I told myself she was stressed, overwhelmed by the new job away from home. I told myself my own struggles with anxiety that month had probably put pressure on her. I was bending over backward to make this my fault. Then came the FaceTime call. She was sitting on a hotel bed. The lighting was harsh. She looked like a stranger wearing my wife's face. And she said very calmly, like she was reading a prepared statement, "I think we should talk about divorce." My hands went numb. Actually numb, like the blood just left them. I remember looking down at my fingers, and they were white. "Elise, what are you? Where's this coming from?" "I love you, but it's not the same." It hasn't been the same. Since times when asterisk, silence. Then I don't know. I just need to figure out who I am. A person doesn't change like this in such a short period of time because she met someone and everything just goes down the drain. That's what I kept telling myself. There has to be another explanation. There times has times to be. She came home in mid-May. I drove to the airport with flowers on the passenger seat like an idiot. When she walked through arrivals, I stood up and opened my arms. She walked right past them. She didn't unpack her suitcase. It sat by the front door like she was just passing through a hotel lobby. That first night I made dinner, her favorite this lemon chicken recipe, I perfected over years of making it wrong. She sat across from me and moved food around her plate like a kid running out the clock, until she could be excused. I kept talking, filling silence, asking about the training, the city, the weather there. She gave me one-word answers and looked at the wall behind my head. After dinner, she sat on the edge of our bed, times our times bed, and said it without flinching. "I don't love you anymore. I want out. Not I think. Not maybe. Not can we try. Just the clean, surgical version. Like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror until it stopped shaking." My throat closed. I sat down on the floor because my legs made the decision for me. I said something, I don't even remember what. Probably begged. Probably said all the things a man says when the foundation cracks beneath him and he's grabbing at air. She watched me fall apart with this expression I'll never forget. Not cruel. Not sad. Asterisk. Resolved. Asterisk. Like I was a task she needed to complete before moving on to the next item on her list. The next morning, and this is where it gets surreal, she offered to clean the house. "Let's make some nice last memories," she said. Like we were closing on a vacation rental and she wanted to leave it tidy for the next guests. I stood in the kitchen watching her wipe down counters we picked out together at Home Depot, and something inside me finally snapped into focus. Not rage. Not grief. Asterisk. Clarity. Asterisk. The kind that arrives cold and unwelcome. For the first time in 7 years, I went through her phone. She was in the shower. Her passcode hadn't changed. Part of me expected to find nothing. Expected to feel guilty to close it. And apologize. And keep trying to save something that was already a corpse. I found everything. She and Craig were already in a relationship. Not flirting. Not talking. A times relationship. Asterisk. They had a lease signed. An apartment. Together. He'd sent her a photo of the keys with a heart emoji 2 weeks before she flew home to tell me she needed to figure out who she was. I scrolled through messages that spanned the entire month she'd been away. Craig calling her my girl. Elise telling him she'd give up everything to start over. Plans for furniture. Discussions about which side of the bed each of them preferred. Asterisk. Which side of the bed? Asterisk. My hands were shaking so badly the screenshots came out blurred. I took them again. And again. Methodical. Every conversation. Every plan. Every lie. Mapped in blue and gray text bubbles. I emailed them to myself, deleted the sent record, put her phone back exactly where she'd left it. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and waited. She came out toweling her hair, humming something. Asterisk. Humming. Asterisk. I tested her. Calmly. Is there someone else? What? No. God, no. This is about times us. Asterisk. You're sure? I'm sure. I wouldn't do that to you. She looked me dead in the eyes when she said it. Steady, practiced. And I realized I wasn't watching my wife lie. I was watching a stranger who'd gotten very comfortable wearing her face. I let it go for 2 more days. Let her keep performing. Let her clean the house and suggest we part as friends and talk about how she hoped I'd find someone who deserves you. Each lie was another screenshot I didn't need because I already had them all. On the 3rd morning, I laid the phone on the table between us, open to the lease agreement with both their names on it. The color left her face so fast I thought she might pass out. It wasn't cheating, she said. Almost immediately. Like she'd preloaded the defense. I asked for the divorce first. You asked for the divorce times, while times you were already with him. We were just talking. You signed a lease, Elise. That's when the script flipped. In under 60 seconds, she went from caught to offensive. I was controlling. I was emotionally abusive. I had made times her feel trapped for years. She rewrote 7 years of history standing in the kitchen I'd renovated with my own hands, and she did it with the confidence of someone who'd been workshopping this narrative with Craig for weeks. I didn't argue. I just said I'm calling a lawyer today. She wanted nothing. No equity from the house, no cars, no savings, no spousal support, nothing. My attorney sat across from me and actually laughed. Not at me, at the terms. In 22 years of practice, he said, I have never seen anyone agree to a deal like this. I knew what it was. Guilt made visible. Guilt in legal formatting. She wanted clean and fast because clean and fast meant she never had to sit with what she'd done. I signed before she could change her mind. Someone told me later, a friend trying to be helpful, 2 months is too short to know someone. Her fling will burn out and she'll be back. And maybe they were right. But Times Back Times was a door I'd already welded shut. I declared my birthday in June as day 1. I hit the gym 5 days a week until my body stopped feeling like a house I'd been evicted from. I cooked meals I'd never attempted. Thai curries, handmade pasta, things that required enough focus to crowd out the noise. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift during the years I'd been so consumed with being half of something that I forgot how to be whole. Then I started moving. Hawaii first. Amsterdam, Vietnam. Norway, Australia. Korea. I stood in places I'd only ever pinned on a shared Pinterest board and discovered they were better without the weight of someone else's expectations attached to them. Oslo was the one that almost got me. We talked about Oslo for years, northern lights, fjords, the whole fantasy. I was walking along the harbor at sunset and the grief hit me mid-stride like a rogue wave. I stopped. Breathed. Let it pass through me instead of fighting it. It didn't sting. It just times was. Asterisk. I forgave her somewhere over the Pacific, 30,000 feet up, watching clouds turn gold. Not for her sake. For the simple reason that carrying it was heavier than letting it go. I forgave Craig too, a man I'd never confronted and never would because he wasn't worth the airfare. I forgave myself for every red flag I'd translated into something softer, because I loved her too much to read them correctly. A person doesn't change in such a short period of time because she met someone and everything goes down the drain. That's what I kept telling myself for months. But the truth is simpler and worse, she didn't change. She just finally showed me who she'd been becoming while I wasn't looking. The marriage termination date is approaching. I thought it would feel like an ending, some final heavy door slamming shut. It doesn't. It feels like paperwork catching up to a life that already started over. Day one was June. Everything since has been the life I didn't know I was supposed to be living.
Story 7.
I'm sure my husband has told his version of this story. I have no doubt he made himself sound like the perfect wronged man, the victim. And in a way, he is. But stories are never that simple, and a person is never just one thing. I was his wife for 25 years. I'm also the woman who destroyed his world. But before I was the villain, I was just lonely. For the last 10 years, I wasn't married to a man, I was married to a CEO. Our life wasn't a partnership. It was his most successful merger. He ran our home like he ran his company, efficiently, profitably, and with absolutely no soul. He talks now about feeling like a ghost in his own house. That's funny because he was the ghost first. For years, his presence was just a series of scheduled events. His alarm went off at 5 a.m. every single day. The muffled sounds of his workout, the smell of his specific coffee brewing, the click of the front door as he left for the office before the sun was up. He'd come home around 7 p.m., have a dinner I'd prepared, ask the girls about their homework, like he was checking off a to-do list, and then disappear into his home office to deal with his stuff. That was it. That was my husband. I wasn't a wife. I was the COO of our family. I was the one who sat with our daughters through fevers and first heartbreaks. I went to every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every school play. I knew their friends, their fears, their favorite foods. He knew their grades. He provided for them, and he did it brilliantly. I will never take that away from him. He gave them a beautiful house, a secure future, and anything they could ever want. But he never really saw them, and he hadn't truly seen me in a decade. I was the one who remembered that he liked his steak medium rare. The one who picked out his mother's birthday gifts. The one who held her hand while she was dying in the hospital because he was closing a deal in another state. I became functional. I was just part of the scenery in the perfect life he had built, like the expensive wallpaper in the foyer. The loneliness was a quiet hum in the background of my life, always there until I almost forgot what the silence felt like. This all happened 3 years ago. He was on another one of his business trips planned with military precision months in advance. The house felt huge and empty, the way it always did when he was gone. There was this kid from my part-time job, let's call him Alex. He was only 21, just a boy. But he saw me. He didn't see mom or husband's name's wife. He just saw a woman. He thought my jokes were funny. He would ask me how my day was and actually wait for the answer, his eyes never glazing over. It was like someone had turned a light on in a room I'd forgotten existed. He came over one night. It was supposed to be completely innocent. He was dropping something off for work. We just got to talking. And for the first time in so long, I felt interesting. I felt alive. That attention, that simple act of being seen, felt like drinking a glass of cold water after walking through a desert. And then, in a moment of pure, unforgivable stupidity, I let him kiss me. Right there in my own living room. It couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds. It was barely even a real kiss before the reality of what I was doing crashed down on me. The shame was instant and overwhelming like a physical sickness. And in that exact horrible moment, I heard a small gasp. My youngest daughter, who was only 14 at the time, was standing in the doorway. The look on her face is burned into my memory. It was a mixture of confusion and a kind of deep, silent hurt that shattered me completely. I ended it, immediately got Alex out of the house so fast I don't even remember what I said to him, and pulled my daughter onto the couch. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I told her the truth, or at least the part of the truth, a 1/4-year-old could handle. I told her it was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless 10-second mistake that meant nothing. And then I did the worst thing. I begged her not to tell her father. I know how that sounds. It sounds like I was saving my own skin. But in my panicked mind, I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting the family. I know my husband. He is a man of black and white, of success and failure. There is no middle ground with him, no room for a messy human error. If he found out, he wouldn't suggest therapy. He wouldn't want to talk it through. It would be an execution. He would detonate our entire life, our 25 years, because of one flaw. I had to choose, confess, and destroy my children's world, or bury a stupid kiss and keep their family intact. I chose to bury it. I chose them. For a while it worked. It was a horrible, heavy secret, but we carried it. Then, of course, she eventually told her older sisters. My eldest, who was always the most like her father, confronted me. She didn't yell. It was worse. She just looked at me with disappointed eyes and asked me how I could do that to Dad, and how I could put that secret on her little sister. I didn't have a good answer. I stumbled. I made excuses. I told her I'd tell him when the time was right. But when is the right time to tell your family you're holding a bomb? The secret festered an unspoken sickness in our house for 3 years. But we were still a family. We were still together. I had almost started to believe the bomb was a dud, that maybe we could just live with it forever. Then yesterday afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello. There was a pause on the other end, then a young woman's shaky voice. Hi, am I speaking with... My name... Yes, this is she. My name is Sarah, she said. I'm Alex's fiancée. I think you and I need to talk. My blood ran cold. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. For 3 years I had been holding my breath, and now all the air was gone. I don't remember how I ended the call with Sarah. I think I mumbled an apology and hung up. I just stood there in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, my entire body shaking. The bomb had gone off. It was just a matter of waiting for the shockwave to hit our house. I knew she would call him. Of course she would. and I knew exactly how he would handle it. He wouldn't call me yelling. He wouldn't rush home demanding an explanation. No, he would gather data. He would get his facts straight. He would approach this like a hostile takeover. The hours that followed were the worst of my life. I paced the house, our hollow, beautiful house, and saw ghosts everywhere. Us bringing our first baby home. The girls learning to walk on the hardwood floors. Christmas mornings by the fireplace where he and I had kissed. It all felt like a movie of someone else's life. I called my daughters. The younger two didn't answer. My eldest picked up and her voice was cold. "He called you, didn't he?" I asked, my own voice a pathetic whisper. "Yes, Mom," she said. "He's with us now. He wanted to hear it from us first." And there it was. He had gone to them. He had interrogated our children about their mother's failure before he even looked me in the eye. The CEO was securing his assets before confronting the liability. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, it was dark. I watched the headlights sweep across the living room wall. The same living room. My stomach twisted into a knot of acid and dread. He walked in, placed his keys in the ceramic bowl on the hall table, the same way he had every night for 25 years. But he didn't look at me. He looked right through me. He had already held the trial in his head, and I had already been found guilty. The sentence was decided. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a man executing a decision. He had spoken to our daughters, he said, his voice flat and empty of emotion, like he was delivering a quarterly report. It was a business debriefing about the failure of our marriage. It was 3 years ago I started my voice cracking. It was a kiss. A stupid 10-second kiss that meant nothing. It was a mistake. He just shook his head, a small, dismissive gesture. A mistake you lied about for 3 years. A mistake you forced our daughter to lie about. I tried to explain the loneliness, the emptiness, the feeling of being invisible in my own life. I tried to shrink the monster he had created in his mind back down to its pathetic true size. But he wasn't listening. He was just waiting for me to finish talking so he could move on to the next item on his agenda. He walked past me and went upstairs. I followed him still, pleading my words bouncing off his rigid back. He went into our bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. He started packing with the calm, methodical efficiency of a man who was already gone. "What are you doing?" I sobbed. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We're a family." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. "There is nothing to fix," he said. "I'm having divorce papers drawn up tomorrow." He zipped the suitcase. He walked out of our room, down the stairs, and out the front door without another word. I didn't see my husband of 25 years leave. I saw a man closing a bad deal, cutting his losses and evicting me from my own life. The next morning, after a night spent with a bottle of whiskey and the ghosts of my marriage, I called him. I was a wreck. My voice was shredded, my head was pounding, but I had to try one last time. I pleaded. I begged. I reminded him of our first apartment, of the vows we made, of the life we had built from nothing. I reminded him of our girls. His reply was a knife. "The kids are adults now," he said, his voice still cold, still distant. "They don't need us to be together." He erased us. In that one sentence, he dismissed 25 years of us as a project that had simply reached its conclusion. The girls were raised, the job was done. My role was redundant. Something inside me snapped. The decades of being the supportive partner, of shelving my own dreams for his, of managing his life and his family while he built his empire, it all came boiling up as pure hot rage. He was discarding me like a piece of outdated office equipment. All that sacrifice, all that love meant absolutely nothing. I had made one mistake and it had erased everything. The most horrible, ugly words I have ever spoken in my life just came pouring out of my mouth. "I'll take the company," I heard myself snarl, the words sounding alien and monstrous. I was there from the beginning. "I'll tell everyone you hit me. I will ruin you." It was the desperate, venomous lashing out of a cornered animal. I was horrified by what I was saying, even as I said it. Then I heard a muffled noise on his end. He had me on speakerphone, and I heard my eldest daughter's voice, small and broken. "Mom, stop!" He had put me on speakerphone for our daughter to hear. He wanted her to hear her mother become this monster. He had pushed me off the cliff, and he made sure our children were there to watch me hit the ground. That was the end. He has the story now, the perfect, tidy narrative. He is the good man, the stoic victim. He has my daughters, who now look at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He has the house. He has the moral high ground. He won. And I am left here in a small apartment surrounded by boxes I don't have the energy to unpack, with nothing but the wreckage of my one stupid, unforgivable mistake. He was right about one thing. He is a man of absolutes. And I am absolutely alone.
Story 8.
Okay, look. I know what people say about me. I've heard the whispers. I know what my old employees probably tell their friends over beers. Billy was a monster. Billy and Gigi were grifters. I get it. From the outside looking in, it's an easy story to tell. But you don't build something that matters, something that's supposed to change the game by worrying about what everyone thinks. You just can't. My name is Billy, and for 3 years my wife Gigi and I ran a company that was on the verge of greatness. I had 8 employees. 8 people who depended on me, sure, but I also depended on them to see the bigger picture. And that's where the problem always started. They saw the hours they worked this week. I saw the empire we were building over the next 10 years. They saw a late paycheck. I saw capital being strategically moved to where it could have the most impact. You think Elon Musk worried about making payroll every single Friday when he was pouring every last cent into a rocket that kept blowing up? You think Steve Jobs was Mr. Popular when he was pushing people to create the iPhone? No. Visionaries are difficult. We have to be. The money stuff was a constant stress, I won't lie. Cash flow is a beast. Some weeks were tight. We'd pay out what we could, maybe half the checks with a promise for the rest on Monday. The team would get these long faces, and I'd want to shake them and say, "Don't you see? This temporary sacrifice is for the massive win that's coming for all of us," but they didn't. They just saw their rent being due. Then they'd see Gigi's posts on Instagram. "Yeah, I know. A new Benz. A weekend spa trip. I can hear you judging me already. But you're thinking like an employee. You have to think like a brand. We were selling a dream, a high-end service. You don't attract big fish, the whales, by looking like you're struggling. You project success. You manifest it. That car wasn't a car. It was a mobile billboard that said, 'We are successful. You should work with us.'" The spa trip wasn't a vacation. It was networking and projecting an image of calm, confident control. Gigi understood that. She was my partner in everything. She managed the image so I could manage the vision. It was a necessary investment, but try explaining that to someone worried about their phone bill. It was all about focus. I had to filter out the noise. I remember one afternoon this young couple came into the office. They were Latino, had a baby with them in a stroller. They were sweet, earnest, and totally clueless. They wanted to start some kind of coffee import-export business. Something about their family in Colombia. They had passion, I'll give them that. But they had nothing else. No business plan, no capital, no understanding of logistics or scale. I listened for about 10 minutes and I knew this was a hobby, a little passion project that would maybe make enough money to be a stall at a farmer's market. My company, my time, we were building rockets. They were building a paper airplane. It would have been cruel to give them false hope, or even worse, take their money for consulting. I politely told them it wasn't a fit for us and sent them on their way. I had a potential 7-figure deal I needed to prep for. I was hunting whales, not saving minnows. For months it felt like we were pushing a boulder uphill. The team was getting more and more resentful about the pay situation. I was getting tired of giving the same pep talks. I felt like I was the only one who still believed. My office walls are covered in photos of my heroes, the guys who thought differently. I'd look at them and think, this is the price of a dream. And then it happened. The sign. It started so small I almost missed it. A like on our company's Facebook page. Then another. Then a comment on a post about market disruption. It wasn't the usual spam. The language was sharp, professional. The profile was for a group called Apex Venture Capital. I clicked on it and my heart started beating faster. Their page was slick, professional, full of articles about scaling and tech investment. They were the real deal. A day later, a message appeared in our inbox. We've been following your company's trajectory. Impressive vision. We believe you have the potential for exponential growth. We'd like to talk. I screamed for Gigi. She ran into the office and I just pointed at the screen, speechless. She read it and her face lit up. "I told you," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I told you they would see it." You're a genius, Billy. It was the most incredible feeling. After all, the doubt, all the struggle, vindication. I was finally talking to people on my level. The emails that followed were like a drug. They spoke my language. We talked about synergy, scalability, burn rates, and 5-year exit strategies. They got it. They saw the whale I was hunting. They weren't worried about the little day-to-day stuff. They saw the big picture. After 2 weeks of calls and emails, they were ready to move forward. They were talking about an initial seed round of a few $1 million. A few million. It was everything I had ever worked for. Of course, there was due diligence. Standard stuff. They needed to see our incorporation papers, our tax ID, our client contracts, and they needed to see clean books. Just one last thing. Billy, the main guy, a man named Arthur, wrote in an email. Our board requires that any company we invest in be in perfect standing with its obligations. Before we can wire the funds, we need a signed declaration that all employee payroll is 100% current and paid in full. It was an annoying little hoop to jump through, but it made sense. It was a sign of a well-run ship. The back wages we owed the team totaled a pretty big number. To cover it, I had to liquidate some personal stock I was saving for a major equipment upgrade. But it was a no-brainer. A small one-time price for a multi-million-dollar future. I called an all-hands meeting. The atmosphere in the room was tense as usual. I stood before my 8 employees, a smile on my face for the first time in months. I have some great news, I said. I know things have been tight, and I appreciate your patience. Your faith is about to be rewarded. As of this afternoon, every single one of you will be paid in full for all outstanding wages. A few of them looked at each other in shock. There was no cheering, just a quiet, stunned silence. Furthermore, I continued, my voice booming with triumph. Get ready! Big things are coming! Very big things! That afternoon, I transferred the money. It felt amazing, like a king showering his people with gold before a great victory. I typed up the confirmation, attached the payroll statements, and sent the final email to Arthur at Apex Venture Capital. All accounts settled, I wrote. Ready for the next step. I barely slept. My mind was racing. I was mentally redesigning our office, planning a hiring spree, picturing the headlines. Local CEO secures major funding set to revolutionize the industry. The next morning, I checked my email the second I woke up. Nothing. That was fine. They were probably finalizing the term sheet. I checked again at noon. Nothing. By the end of the day, a knot was forming in my stomach. I sent a polite follow-up. Hi, Arthur. Just checking in. Eager to see the paperwork. The response came back instantly. But it wasn't from Arthur. It was from the server. A cold automated message delivery has failed to these recipients or groups. Arthur at apexvc.com. The address couldn't be found. I stared at the screen at that cold automated message. Address not found. It didn't make any sense. A multi-million-dollar venture capital firm doesn't just disappear. I frantically typed their name into Google. Nothing. The slick website was gone. The LinkedIn profiles of their partners were gone. It was like they had never existed. My hands started to shake. Gigi came in a celebratory bottle of champagne in her hand. "Did the papers come through?" she asked. Her smile bright enough to power a city. I just shook my head, unable to speak, and pointed at the monitor. I watched the color drain from her face as she read the error message, then read it again. "It's a mistake," she said, her voice a little too high. "It has to be a technical glitch." But we both knew it wasn't. We spent the next hour in a frantic, silent panic scouring the internet. Every trace of Apex Venture Capital had been wiped clean. It was a ghost. A phantom. And then the ice-cold realization washed over me. This wasn't a failed deal. It was a setup. They hadn't taken a single dollar from me. They had just made me pay my employees. The thought was so absurd, so small-minded, that it felt like a physical blow. The humiliation was dizzying. I hadn't been out-negotiated by a corporate raider. I'd been tricked into being a responsible boss. The next few days were hell. I walked into the office and the whole atmosphere felt different. The quiet hum of work now sounded like a silent judgment. The employees were professional. Too professional. They arrived on time. They did their work. They went home. The low-level grumbling about late pay was gone, replaced by an unnerving, placid silence. Every polite "Good morning, Billy" felt like a knife twisting. They knew. They had to know. My paranoia went into overdrive. I'd watch them from my office, the chamber as Gigi called it. I'd see two of them talking by the water cooler, and I'd be certain they were laughing at me. One of them, Maria, the quiet designer who was always sketching in a notebook, gave me a look one afternoon. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was appraisal. Like she was seeing me for the first time, and she wasn't impressed. The final straw came a week later. I overheard Maria talking quietly on the phone in the break room. I only caught a few words in Spanish. "Sí a tiempo. Todo pagado. Gracias a tu primo. Asterisk. Yes, on time. All paid. Thanks to your cousin. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. It all clicked into place. The couple. The Latino couple with the baby and the coffee idea. The minnows I'd brushed off so I could hunt my whale. I walked out of my office. All of you. Conference room. Now. The 8 of them filed in, their faces blank. The air was thick with tension. I stood at the head of the table, my hands flat against the wood to keep them from shaking with rage. All right. Who was it, I asked, my voice dangerously low. They just looked at each other. Don't play dumb with me, I snapped. Apex Venture Capital. The brilliant, elaborate little prank. Who came up with it? Silence. I locked eyes with Maria. Your cousin Maria, was it your cousin? The one with the brilliant coffee idea I didn't have time for. She didn't flinch. She just looked back at me, her expression calm. They needed help, Billy. They looked up to you. You dismissed them in 5 minutes because they didn't look like money. So you decided to, what? Teach me a lesson. I was almost shouting now. You built this entire fake company, this whole illusion, just to force my hand, to make me pay you what you were owed. It wasn't that hard, she said, her voice still infuriatingly level. My cousin's husband does web design. He can build a professional-looking landing page in a day. A few fake LinkedIn profiles. A disposable email address. It turns out when someone wants to believe something badly enough, they don't look too closely at the details. The truth of that statement hit me harder than any of it. She was right. I had been so desperate for validation, so hungry to be seen as the visionary I knew I was, that I never once questioned it. I saw what I wanted to see. You sabotaged this company, I said, my voice cracking. I had to liquidate assets to pay you. That was our expansion capital. You killed the future for a few weeks of back pay. For the first time, someone else spoke up. It was Mark, our lead programmer. What future, Billy? He asked, and there was no heat in it. Just exhaustion. The future where we get paid half a check one week and nothing the next, while you and Gigi are leasing new cars. We weren't a team building an empire. We were 8 people you used as a line of credit. The room was silent. He had taken the air out of me. There was nothing I could say. They weren't angry employees. They weren't traitors. They were just done. They had found a way to get what they were owed, and that was it. There was no grand conspiracy. It was just a group of people who wanted their paychecks. Maria stood up. I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice, she said, placing a folded piece of paper on the table. Though I doubt it'll matter. She was right. She left that Friday. By the end of the next week, 4 others had quit. The 2 7-figure deals I'd been chasing fell through. I no longer had the capital or the staff to execute them. Within a month, it was just me and Gigi in an office that felt like a tomb surrounded by 8 empty desks. The silence was absolute. We had to break the lease. We sold the new Benz at a loss. Gigi stopped posting on social media. The dream was over. My empire had crumbled before the first brick was even properly laid. Sometimes I sit in my study at home and look at the pictures of Jobs and Musk that I took from my office wall. I try to see myself in them to feel that same fire. They faced betrayal. They had people who doubted them. But this feels different. They were stabbed in the back by competitors and boards of directors. I was undone by a fake website, and the quiet desperation of the people I saw every day. They didn't steal my idea. They didn't steal my money. They just held up a mirror, and I hated what I saw. I wasn't a visionary betrayed by his disciples. I was just a guy who didn't pay his bills, outsmarted by the people I thought weren't smart enough to matter. The minnows didn't just get away. They sank the whole damn boat.
Story 9.
I'm the wife. His wife? Well, his soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm sure by now you've all read his side of the story. I'm the monster who cheated the one who broke our family and traumatized our children. The villain. And I won't lie. I did a terrible, stupid, selfish thing. I had an affair for 7 months. That part is true. But if you think our marriage ended 7 months ago, you're wrong. Our marriage died a long, slow death over years, and he was the one who unplugged the life support long before I did. He probably told you we had a great marriage. And from his perspective, I guess we did. The house was clean, the bills were paid, the kids were happy and healthy. I managed the schedules, the school forms, the doctor's appointments. I was a good partner in the business of running our life. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being his wife and just became the household manager. He stopped seeing times me, asterisk. I would try to talk to him. I'd sit on the edge of the bed after the kids were asleep and try to tell him I was feeling lost, or that I was scared about getting older, or just some stupid story about my day. He'd be scrolling on his phone, half listening, and just say, or, "That's tough." It was like talking to a wall. A polite wall, but a wall nonetheless. He'd get frustrated when I got upset. "I'm not a mind reader," he'd say. I never asked him to be. I just asked him to listen, to look at me when I was talking, to be present. The loneliness was a physical thing. It was an ache in my chest when I'd see other couples holding hands. It was a pit in my stomach when I'd cook his favorite meal and he'd eat it in 10 minutes without a word, before heading to the garage to work on some project. We lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but we were miles apart. I felt like a ghost. I'd look in the mirror and wonder who the tired, invisible woman looking back at me was. He says he was happy. Of course he was. His life was running perfectly. He didn't notice the person running it was falling apart. Then came the affair. It's the part I know you're waiting for, the part that makes me unforgivable. It wasn't planned. I didn't go looking for it. It was a man at my work. He didn't look like a model or drive a fancy car. He just saw me. He'd ask about my weekend and actually wait for the answer. He laughed at my dumb jokes. One day I was wearing a new dress, nothing special, and he said, "You look really nice today." My husband hadn't said anything like that to me in 5 years. It was a drop of water in the desert, and I was so thirsty. It started with lunches and escalated. It was a horrible mistake, a selfish escape. For 7 months I lived 2 separate lives. In one life, I was a mom and a wife, packing lunches and going to soccer games, drowning in guilt. In the other, for a few hours a week, I was just a woman who someone wanted to talk to. I walled them off in my head. The affair was a fantasy, a symptom of the sickness in my marriage. My family, my home. That was my real life. I never, not for 1 second, wanted to leave my husband. I just wanted to feel something again. I thought I could keep it contained, that it was a mistake I would eventually end and deal with on my own. About 3 months ago, he started getting even more distant. I know it sounds impossible, but he did. He stopped even pretending to listen. He'd come home from work and just go straight to his room or leave the house altogether. His answers became one word. Fine, okay, nothing. At first, I barely even noticed. It was just a slightly colder version of the cold I was already used to. I told myself he was just stressed with work. It's easier to believe your husband is stressed than to believe he doesn't love you anymore. Then I saw the bills. I was cleaning off the kitchen counter, sorting through a pile of mail he'd left there, and I saw it. An envelope from a law firm. I recognized the name from billboards around town. Under the name in small print, it said, Family Law and Divorce Attorneys. My blood ran cold. My hands started shaking. I stood there for a full minute just staring at it, my heart pounding in my ears. But the denial is strong when the truth is too awful to handle. Asterisk. It's for his business times, I told myself. Asterisk, he's helping his parents with their will. It could be anything. It's not for us. Asterisk. I pushed it back into the pile and tried to forget I ever saw it. The real warning shot came last week. It was a Saturday. I was in the living room and he called the kids over to the sofa. I was in the same room, maybe 10 feet away. I thought he was going to talk to them about their chores or something. But his voice was different. Serious. He looked at our son and our daughter and said so calmly, You know, your mom and I love you very much. But sometimes grown-ups can't be together anymore. The world stopped. I felt all the air get sucked out of my lungs. I was frozen. He was saying this times in front of me, times like I wasn't even there. My mind was screaming. Asterisk. What are you doing? Stop! Don't say this to them times, but not a sound came out of my mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My silence wasn't me agreeing. It was paralysis. It was the absolute terror of a deer staring into the headlights of a truck. But even then, even after that, my stupid, hopeful brain twisted it. I thought times, okay, this is it. This is his warning. He knows something or he suspects. He's showing me how serious this is. He's telling me we have to fix this now or this is what happens. Asterisk. I spent the next few days in a panic, deciding how I would end the affair, how I would confess everything, how I would beg him to go to counseling with me. I was ready to do anything to save us. I thought this was our rock bottom, the crisis we needed to finally wake up and fight for our marriage. I was preparing for the biggest, ugliest, most important fight of my life. He came home that night and I had my speech ready. My stomach was in knots. I was ready for him to yell, to scream, to cry. I was ready for a war. He walked through the door, put his keys on the counter, and turned to me. He was grinning. Not a small smile, but a wide, happy, relieved grin that reached his eyes. It was a look I hadn't seen on his face in years. And it was the single most terrifying thing I have ever seen. That grin. I will see that grin in my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't the sad, pained smile of a man trying to be brave. It was genuine. He looked happy, truly, deeply happy. Like he'd just gotten a promotion or won the lottery. And in that moment I knew the fight I had been preparing for was already over. I had lost before it even began. "We need to talk," he said, his voice light and airy. He gestured to the sofa, the same sofa where he had just told our children their family was breaking apart. I sat down like a robot, my limbs stiff, my prepared speech dissolving into ash in my mouth. He didn't sit next to me. He sat in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like this was some kind of friendly business meeting. "So I know," he said, still with that horrifying calm. "I've known for a while. About you and him?" My world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from my face. I opened my mouth to say something to deny, to explain, to apologize, but he held up a hand. "Don't." "It's okay," he said. Asterisk. It's okay times. Honestly, it just made things clearer for me. I've been checked out for a long time, and this was the permission I needed, I guess, to finally be done. He said it all so simply, so matter-of-factly. He wasn't heartbroken. He wasn't angry. He sounded relieved. And that's what broke me. The wall in my mind, the one that kept my stupid affair separate from my real life, didn't just crack. It exploded. The fantasy wasn't a separate, harmless thing. It was the bullet I had loaded into the gun myself and handed to him. "What? What are you saying?" I stammered my voice, a pathetic whisper. "I'm saying I want a divorce," he said. And the grin came back smaller this time, but still there. "It's time. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to start dating again. Be happy." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I've actually reconnected with someone. Monica. From my old hometown. You might remember her. We've been talking a lot. It's been nice." Monica. An old acquaintance. He hadn't just been detaching. He had been building a new bridge while letting ours crumble into the sea. He had mourned our marriage in private months ago and moved on while I was still trying to patch the leaks. The lawyer's bills, the distance, telling the kids it wasn't a warning. It was an execution plan. And I was the last to know. That's when the screaming started. It wasn't a choice. It was a sound that tore its way out of my throat, raw and animalistic. The carefully contained woman who ran the household and packed the lunches was gone, and in her place was just pure, primal agony. "No!" I cried, stumbling to my knees in front of him. I grabbed his legs, my nails digging into his jeans. "No, please don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll end it. I'll do anything. Please don't leave me. Don't do this to our family." The tears were blinding me. Snot was running down my face. I was a pathetic, groveling mess on the floor, begging for the life I had just realized I'd thrown away. I was begging for the man who hadn't really been there for years, but whose absence now felt like a physical amputation. This wasn't an act. This was the real me. The terrified, stupid woman underneath. finally understanding the catastrophic price of trying to feel seen. He didn't move. He just looked down at me, and his face was no longer happy. It was cold, annoyed. He saw my breakdown not as the genuine shattering of a soul, but as a manipulative tactic. A final desperate attempt to get my way. "Stop it," he said, his voice sharp. "Just stop. It's too late for this." He tried to pull his legs away, but I held on tighter, sobbing, making incoherent promises. I would change. I would fix myself. We could go to counseling. We could fix this. He saw he wasn't getting through to me. He pulled out his phone. I thought he was going to call the police, and a new wave of horror washed over me. But he just dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. He looked at me with disgust as I wept at his feet. "Hey, Sarah," he said into the phone. He was calling my sister. "Yeah, it's me. I need you to come over. Now. She's not taking it well. You need to come and get her." He hung up. He looked back down at me. "Your sister is on her way." And with that, he stood up, dislodging my hands, and walked out of the room. He went into the garage, and a few moments later, I heard the door open and his car start. He just left. He left me in a heap on the floor of our living room, a broken thing to be collected by someone else. I don't know how long I lay there choking on my own sobs. The silence of the house was different. It wasn't the lonely silence of a quiet evening anymore. It was the dead silence of a tomb. My tomb. The home I had poured my heart into for 15 years suddenly felt alien, like I was a trespasser. Every family photo on the wall was a judgment. Every one of my kids' drawings on the fridge was a reminder of the perfect family I had just detonated. When my sister's headlights cut across the living room window, a deep, hollow shame settled in my gut. She walked in using her spare key and found me right where he'd left me. She didn't say a word. She just knelt down, wrapped her arms around me, and helped me stand. As she led me out the door of my own home, I took one last look back. It was just a house now. The love was gone. I had been looking for a spark, a moment of noise in the silence, and in my search I had burned the whole thing to the ground. He might have lit the final match, but I was the one who had spent months soaking the floors in gasoline.
Story teen.
I know what my husband told you. I know the story he's painting of me. The cheating wife. The monster who destroyed our family. I'm not here to tell you I didn't do it. I did. I own every single ugly part of that. But if you only hear his side, you're reading the last chapter of a book and pretending you know the whole story. The truth is, I cheated to escape a man who had already buried me alive. For 11 years, our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a project he managed. My husband, let's call him Mark, is a master of efficiency. Our life was a spreadsheet. Finances were optimized. Vacations were scheduled a year in advance. Even our morning hugs felt like they were on a to-do list. 8:15 a.m. hug wife. Check. He'd say I was a great wife. and an excellent mother. The way a manager praises a reliable employee. They weren't compliments. They were performance reviews. I was a functional component in the perfect life he had built. I played my part. I raised our beautiful twin boys. I kept the house perfect. I smiled at his work dinners. I was good at it. But then, about a year ago, I was laid off. My career wasn't just a job. It was the one corner of the world that was mine. It was my name on a project, my ideas in a meeting. It was my proof that I existed as something other than Mark's wife or the boy's mom. And just like that, it was gone. I was completely adrift. I'd sit in the quiet house after dropping the kids at school and feel this crushing silence. When I tried to talk to Mark about it, he saw it as a logistical problem. It's fine. I make enough for all of us, he'd say, patting my shoulder before turning back to his laptop. He thought the problem was money. He didn't understand that the gaping hole in my chest had nothing to do with our bank account. My identity had been erased, and he didn't even notice it was missing. The numbness set in. I went through the motions every day. Wake up, get the kids ready, clean, cook, wait for Mark, smile, go to sleep. He later said he watched my nightly routine and saw a calm, happy wife. He didn't see a calm woman. He saw the autopilot of a person who had completely checked out. I was a ghost in my own home. Then I ran into an old colleague. Let's call him David. We got coffee, and it was like a jolt of electricity. He didn't ask about the kids or what I was making for dinner. He asked about my old projects. He said, I still tell people about that presentation you gave back in 18. You were brilliant. He saw me, the person I used to be, the person I had forgotten. My best friend Beth saw the change in me after that coffee. I was alive again. You look happier than I've seen you in years, she told me. When I confessed how lost I felt, how invisible I was in my own marriage, she just squeezed my hand. You deserve to feel something, she said. Anything. She was right. So David and I had lunch. It was just a lunch. A stolen hour of feeling like myself. But that feeling, that validation was like a drug. He listened. He laughed at my jokes. He made me feel interesting and desired. It wasn't about love, not really. It was about chaos. It was the one thing in my life that Mark couldn't schedule, couldn't control, couldn't optimize. One lunch turned into another. And then, one day, that lunch ended at a cheap, seedy motel just off the highway. I know how that sounds. It was ugly and desperate. But it was times mine asterisk. Every whispered message, every lie I told to get out of the house, it was a choice I was making for myself. I was so tired of being good, of being the perfect, predictable wife. For an hour or two in that dingy room, I was something else. I even brought Beth to one of our lunches. It was a stupid, clumsy attempt to normalize it in my own head. See, we're just friends catching up. And look, my best friend is here too. Of course, she saw it. She saw the way I looked at him, the electricity between us. She pulled me aside in the bathroom and told me I was playing with fire. I knew she was right, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I needed to get burned. Coming home after was the hardest part. It was like putting on a costume. I'd walk in, drop a bag of burgers on the counter for dinner, and switch back into Mom. I'd help the boys with their homework, tuck them into bed, and listen to Mark talk about his day. He said later that he never suspected a thing because I acted as if nothing happened. He's right. I did. But he was the one who hadn't truly seen me in years. That calm he saw wasn't shamelessness. It was the practiced mask of a woman who had been drowning in plain sight for a decade. The end came on a Sunday. I was at my parents' house with my sister and her kids. It was a normal family dinner, loud, messy, full of laughter. For a few hours, I almost felt normal. Then my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was flat, cold. "Hey, are you at your mom's?" "Yeah, we just finished eating." "What's up?" "Don't come home just yet. Just stay there for a little while. I'll call you later." "Is everything okay?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "Everything's fine," he said in a tone that meant the exact opposite. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. An hour went by. Then another. The sky outside was getting dark. My mom was cleaning up the kitchen and my dad was watching the game with my brother-in-law. I was sitting on the couch staring at my phone when the doorbell rang. My dad grumbled about unexpected visitors and went to the door. I could hear him talking to someone, his voice low and confused. My mom came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Who is it, honey?" she called out. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. I saw my dad standing in the open doorway holding a large manila envelope. Standing on the porch was a man in a cheap suit I'd never seen before. He wasn't looking at my dad. He was looking past him right at me. He gave a small professional nod, turned, and walked back to his car. "What is that?" my mom asked, walking up behind my dad. My father turned around slowly, his face pale. He looked from the envelope in his hands, then up at me. His eyes were filled with a kind of confusion and horror I'd never seen before. He held it out to me without a word. My name was typed neatly on the front. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely open the envelope. Inside the first page was a cold, formal, legal document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My breath left my body in a rush. I sank onto the edge of the couch, the papers shaking in my lap. My mom started crying a soft, wounded sound. My dad just stood there, his face like stone, looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over my entire body. Mark hadn't just ended our marriage. He had executed it. In front of my family. He wanted them to be the first to see what I'd done to make sure I had nowhere to run for comfort. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I wasn't just driving toward a confrontation. I was driving toward a verdict that had already been decided. This wasn't the act of a man lashing out in pain. This was the opening move of a strategist. Every red light felt like an eternity. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my heart was a cold, heavy lump in my chest. The front door was unlocked. stepped inside, and the first thing I saw were the trash bags. Not one or two. At least a dozen huge black industrial bags lined the hallway. They were bulging. I reached out and touched one. Through the thin plastic, I could feel the hard corner of a picture frame. I tore a small hole in the bag. Inside, I saw the edge of a scrapbook I had spent months making for the boys, filled with pictures from their first 5 years. In another bag, I saw the quilt my grandmother had made for me, my wedding dress, photo albums. Every personal trinket, every sentimental object, every piece of my life that wasn't shared furniture was stuffed into these bags like garbage. He was sending a clear message: you are disposable. I found him in his office. He was sitting at his desk perfectly calm, as if waiting for a business meeting to start. There were no tears, no red-rimmed eyes. Just a chilling stillness. "Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up at me. He just gestured to the chair opposite his desk. I sat down. It felt like I was in a police interrogation. He slid a thick, professional-looking binder across the desk. A file. "I hired someone," he said, his voice completely flat. "I wanted to be sure." I opened it. The first page was a photo of me and David laughing at a restaurant table. My friend Beth was there smiling, caught mid-sentence. Then a picture of my car pulling into the motel parking lot. A picture of us walking toward one of the rooms. There were dates, times, even receipts. It was a meticulous, soulless log of my betrayal. My stomach churned. He wasn't a husband confronting his wife. He was a prosecutor presenting his case. Then he reached over and pressed a button on a small digital recorder on his desk. My own voice filled the silent room. A soft laugh, then a whisper. Then David's voice. I heard sounds I never ever thought another human being would hear. Intimate sounds. Sounds from that cheap, ugly motel room. Sounds that were private, desperate, and mine. He made me listen to it. He watched my face as the color drained from it as I started to shake uncontrollably. It was a violation so profound, so utterly dehumanizing, that it took my breath away. He wasn't just hurt. He wanted to annihilate me. When he finally turned it off, the silence was deafening. "Is there anyone else?" he asked, his eyes still cold and analytical. The question wasn't a search for truth. I could see it. He was just checking for more ammunition, more data points for his file. It was a final dismissive flick, a way to tell me he assumed I was rotten to the core. "No," I choked out. "Just him." He nodded, as if ticking off a box. Good to know. Then he leaned forward, and for the first time a flicker of something that wasn't coldness appeared in his eyes. It was something harder. "You will not fight me on custody. You will agree to 50 over 50, and you will not say a single bad word about me to our sons. If you do this, file," he tapped the binder, "becomes public record in our divorce proceedings. Their teachers, our friends, every parent at their school will know exactly what their mother is. Do you understand me? That's when I finally saw him. The man I'd been married to for over a decade. This wasn't about a broken heart. It was about power. I had disrupted his perfect controlled world. I had introduced a variable he hadn't accounted for. And the punishment had to be absolute. I had broken his rules. I stood up my legs, feeling like they might give out. "What about David's wife?" I asked, a sick feeling washing over me. "She's pregnant, Mark." He looked at me, and a small, tight smile touched his lips. It was the cruelest expression I had ever seen. "Oh, I know. I went to see her this afternoon, just before the papers were served to you. I felt she had a right to know. I gave her a copy of the file. That was it. That was the moment that broke me. This wasn't about healing or closure or protecting his family. This was a victory lap. He didn't just need to punish me. He needed to burn down everything I had touched. Ruining that pregnant woman's life was just collateral damage in his perfectly executed war. I left that night with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and 2 of the trash bags he had so carefully packed for me. My life reduced to garbage. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers and painful conversations. I had to sit down with our 9-year-old boys and explain in the simplest terms I could that Mommy and Daddy weren't going to live together anymore. Seeing the confusion and hurt in their eyes was a punishment worse than any audio recording. I know what I did. I cheated. That is a truth I have to live with every single day. I own the lies, the selfishness, the hurt I caused. I'm not asking for pity, but I need you to understand. I didn't break the heart of a loving man who adored his wife. I broke the rules of a cold and methodical warden who was angry that one of his assets had malfunctioned. My affair was a desperate, reckless, and wrong attempt to feel alive. His response was a calculated, cruel, and systematic campaign to destroy me. He didn't just want to divorce me. He wanted to erase me.
Story 11.
I'm sure he's told you his version of the story. I'm the villain. The cheating fiancé who blew up an 8-year relationship for nothing. I get it. It's a simple story, and it makes me easy to hate. But the truth is, our relationship didn't die the day he found out about my affair. It had been dying for years, a slow and quiet death from neglect. I just finally stopped trying to resuscitate it. We met in college. It was the classic storybook romance. We grew up together, really. For 8 years, he was my person, my entire world. When he decided to go to grad school in 2017, I was his #1 cheerleader. I packed his lunches, proofread his papers, and organized my whole life around his schedule. We were a team, or so I thought. But slowly, teams started to feel a lot more like I was his personal support staff. His life was the main event, and I was just working backstage to make sure it all went smoothly. I got lonely. It was a deep, aching loneliness that settled in my bones, even when he was sitting right next to me on the couch, typing away on his laptop. To fill the silence, I threw myself into my hobbies. I joined a few different sports leagues, anything to get me out of our quiet apartment. That's where I met the first guy. It was never physical. It was just conversation. He'd ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. We'd text about stupid stuff. A funny thing that happened at work, a new show we were both watching. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone saw times me. Times not just the girlfriend of a brilliant grad student. I knew I was crossing a line. I wasn't an idiot, but it felt like a lifeline. Of course, my fiancé, let's call him Alex, found out. He went through my phone while I was in the shower and saw the screenshots of our conversations. The look on his face when I came out of the bathroom is something I'll never forget. I was horrified. Not because I was caught, but because I had caused that look. I had hurt the person I loved most in the world. I thought it was the wake-up call we desperately needed. I broke off all contact with the other guy immediately. I begged Alex for forgiveness. I swore I would do anything to fix us. And I meant it. We stayed together, but something broke that day. His trust was gone. It became a permanent cloud hanging over us. If I smiled at my phone, his eyes would narrow. If I said I was going out for drinks with my friends, there'd be a follow-up text an hour later asking when I'd be home. I felt like I was living under a microscope, constantly on trial for a crime I was trying so hard to repent for. I told myself it would get better with time. I just had to prove myself. In September 2019, he proposed. It was beautiful, romantic, everything I had ever dreamed of. I thought times this is it. This is our fresh start, asterisk. The ring on my finger felt like a promise that the past was in the past. We set a date for May 2020. We were finally going to be a real family. Finally moving forward. Then the world stopped. The pandemic hit and our wedding, along with everyone else's plans, was canceled. Suddenly, we were right back where we started. Stuck. Trapped in our 2-bedroom apartment with no future to plan and a past full of suspicion. The holding pattern that had defined our last few years became our entire reality. His life was still about his goals, his timeline. Everything we were supposed to do together was always on the horizon. Someday, when I finish my dissertation, someday when I get that tenure track position, someday we'll buy a house, someday we can get a dog, someday. I was about to turn 30 and my entire life felt like it was waiting for his permission to begin. I'd see pictures of my friends getting puppies, moving into their first homes, having kids. Their lives were happening now. Mine was a collection of some days that never seemed to get any closer. I tried talking to him about it, about how I felt like I was fading into the background of his life. He'd just say he was building our future, that I needed to be patient. But how long can you wait for your own life to start? At work, I started becoming friends with a coworker, David. It was innocent. We were on the same project team, so we spent a lot of time together. We'd grab lunch and complain about our boss the way you do. But our talks started getting deeper. He'd ask me about my dreams. Not what I wanted to help Alex achieve, but what times I wanted. I couldn't even remember the last time someone had asked me that. One day at lunch, I mentioned how badly I wanted a dog. I was just talking, filling the air. Alex's response was always the same logical shutdown. We'll get one when we have a yard. David just smiled and said, "My apartment is tiny, but my golden retriever makes it feel like a mansion. You just make it work when you really want something." It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. He was a man who made things work for times now, asterisk. The connection with David was undeniable. He saw me. He listened to me. He talked about family and a home, not as some distant reward for years of hard work, but as something you build day by day starting tomorrow. Being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room for years. It wasn't a calculated plan. It was a slow slide into something I couldn't stop. It started with lunches that ran a little too long, then drinks after work to de-stress. One night, he walked me to my car in the rain, and we just stood there under the streetlight. I knew I should go home back to the silent apartment and the weight of Alex's quiet suspicion, but I couldn't. I didn't want to go back to my black and white life of waiting. I wanted to stay in the color I felt with David. I kissed him. The months that followed were a blur of secrecy and adrenaline. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But it was also the first time in years I felt truly alive. I was a terrible liar, but I got better. I learned to delete call logs and clear my browser history. I hated the person I was becoming, this sneaky, deceitful woman. A part of me even wondered if I was just turning into my father, who had done the same thing to my mom. But the thought of going back to just waiting was more terrifying than the thought of getting caught. I came home one Tuesday night, later than usual. I told Alex I was having dinner with a friend from college. I'd actually been at David's apartment. I walked in the door, my heart doing its usual dance of guilt and relief. The apartment was dark, except for the glow of a laptop screen in the living room. Alex was sitting on the couch, perfectly still, just staring at me. His face was pale, and his eyes were empty. The laptop was open on the coffee table in front of him, and I knew in that single gut-wrenching moment that it was all over. "My laptop." That's all he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He didn't have to say anything else. I saw it all laid out on the screen, my location history, a map of my lies with pins dropped at David's address day after day. He had become a detective, and I had made him one. The dynamic we had fallen into, the cheater and the investigator, was now out in the open. I sank onto the arm of the couch, my purse sliding to the floor. I didn't have the energy to deny it. There was no point. The truth was right there, glowing in the dark. "Alex, I started, but my voice broke. What could I even say? "I'm sorry" felt pathetic and insulting after what I'd done. He didn't yell. I think that was the worst part. I almost wished he would scream at me, throw something, anything to show the hurt that I knew was churning inside him. Instead, he was cold, clinical. He closed the laptop with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "How long?" he asked. "A few months," I whispered. He just nodded, processing it. He wasn't asking questions to understand my feelings. He was gathering facts for a case he had already closed. It wasn't a conversation. It was a sentencing. He gave me a list of my crimes, dates, and times. I had lied inconsistencies in my stories that he had probably been collecting for weeks. I finally found my voice, desperate to make him understand that this wasn't just about sex or another man. "This isn't what you think," I pleaded. "I was so unhappy, Alex. I felt like I was disappearing." He scoffed a bitter, humorless sound. "Unhappy? We were engaged. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to start a life." I shot back, the frustration boiling over. "But it was always on your terms, on your timeline. I've been waiting for you for 8 years. Waiting for you to finish school, waiting for you to get a job, waiting for you to be ready. When were you going to be ready for times?" Me asterisk. I tried to explain about David, about how he just listened, about how he made me feel seen. I brought up the dog, and I could see the confusion and disgust on Alex's face. To him, it was such a stupid, trivial thing to mention at a time like this. The dog. "You blew up our lives over a Times dog asterisk." "It was never about the damn dog," I said, my voice rising. "It was a symbol. It was about wanting something, Times Now asterisk. A home, a family, a life. All the things you kept pushing down the road for someday. David wanted those things today. He wanted to build a life with me, not just pencil me into his 5-year plan." That was the wrong thing to say. I saw the last bit of hope drain from his eyes. He looked at me, then truly looked at me, and I don't think he recognized the person sitting in front of him. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The lie was right there on my tongue. It would have been so easy to say no, to try and salvage something from the wreckage. But I was done with lies. I told him that I did. I said the words hanging in the air between us like poison. He flinched a small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was like I had physically struck him. He was silent for a long time. Then he laid out his terms for my redemption. No contact with David ever again. I would quit my job. I would give him all my passwords. I would go to therapy. It was a list of demands, not a path to reconciliation. "I'll do it," he said, "if you'll do all that. We can fix this." But I knew we couldn't. He wasn't trying to fix us. He was trying to lock me back in my cage. He asked me if I could end it with David, if I could cut him out of my life completely. I thought about the easy conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being a priority. It would hurt, I admitted quietly. That friendship, it meant a lot to me. That was it. That was the moment our 8 years together officially died. To him, my hesitation was the ultimate betrayal. He saw it as me choosing my affair partner over him. Maybe I was. He later told a friend I looked smug in that moment. I wasn't smug. I was just done. Done fighting, done waiting, done pretending. It was the quiet resignation of a woman who had finally accepted that the dream was over. The remorse I felt in 2017 was for hurting our future together. But in that living room, I realized that future had been dead for a long time. I wasn't blowing anything up. I was just walking away from the rubble. He told me to pack a bag and leave. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and quiet heartbreak. I stayed on a friend's couch feeling like a ghost. We communicated through text messages about who would get the couch and who would keep the blender. Dividing 8 years of a shared life is a brutal process. Every object held a memory, and I had to sort them into his and hers piles. Telling my family was its own special kind of hell. My mom cried. My dad, the man whose infidelity had broken our family years ago, had the nerve to look disappointed in me. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent my whole life promising myself I would never be like him or my sister, who had also cheated on her husband. Yet here I was, another branch on a rotten family tree. The judgment from our mutual friends was swift. I was the villain, the heartless cheater who threw away a perfectly good man. And in their story, I was. Alex was a good man. He was kind and smart and loyal. He just wasn't my man anymore. He deserved someone who was excited about his someday. I deserved someone who was excited about my now. I don't know if I'll end up with David. Honestly, this was never really about him. He was a catalyst, a glimpse of a different kind of life, but he wasn't the destination. This was about me. It was about me finally refusing to be a supporting character in someone else's story. I hurt Alex. I know that, and I will carry that regret with me forever. I took a good, loving person, and I shattered his trust and his heart. There's no justifying that. But I can't regret choosing myself. I'm 30 years old, and for the first time my life feels like my own. It's messy and uncertain, and some nights the loneliness is so heavy it feels hard to breathe. But it's real. It's happening now. I'm no longer waiting for someday.
Story 12.
I'm sure you've heard my husband's side of the story. I'm the villain. The cheating wife who had an affair with a youth pastor. He's the poor, blindsided victim who did everything right. I'm not here to say I'm a saint. What I did was wrong. But there's a reason people break. And for 10 years, my husband was the one slowly chipping away at me until I finally shattered. When we got married, I thought he was the most amazing man I'd ever met. He was smart, driven, and he seemed to see a potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. At first, it was sweet. But that sweetness slowly turned into a project plan. I wasn't his wife. I was his fixer-upper. His love came with a to-do list. It started small. Let's go to the gym together, he'd say. It sounded like a nice couple activity, but it was always followed by a comment about my progress or lack thereof. It wasn't about being healthy together. It was about me not being thin enough for him. Then it was about my job. I worked as a receptionist, and I liked it. It wasn't a career, but I was good at it. For him, it was an embarrassment. "Why don't you go back to school? I'll pay," he'd offer. It sounded generous, but the real message was loud and clear. You aren't educated enough. You aren't ambitious enough. You aren't times enough. Asterisk. Every part of my life was under his microscope. The way I dressed, the friends I had, the books I read. He saw me as a collection of flaws, overweight, underemployed, uneducated. He later admitted he was mean and that he was just trying to help me become his equal, but his words felt like tiny paper cuts day after day until I was just covered in them. I lived under the heavy, silent weight of his disappointment. I started to believe what he was telling me, that I was a failure. A few years ago, the direct comments stopped. I wish I could say it was because he finally accepted me, but it was worse. He just gave up. He retreated into his own world of academic studies and work, and our home became a library of silence. He remembers that time as being good. He's told people we had good conversation and good sex. I remember routine. I remember having sex on Tuesdays and Fridays because it was on the schedule. I remember conversations where he'd talk about his work for an hour, and when he finally asked about my day, his eyes would glaze over before I could finish a sentence. He wasn't my husband. He was my performance reviewer, and I'd failed my annual evaluation. I have never felt as lonely as I did, sitting on the couch next to him watching TV in complete silence. That's when I met Mark. He was the new youth pastor at our church. He was friendly, kind, and when he asked how you were doing, he actually waited for the answer. We started talking after service one Sunday. I was feeling particularly low, and I guess it showed on my face. He just asked if I was okay, and something inside me broke. I started talking, and I couldn't stop. I told him about the loneliness, about feeling like I could never measure up, about living with a man who made me feel invisible. He just listened. He didn't offer a 5-point plan to fix my life. He didn't tell me all the things I was doing wrong. He just nodded and said, "That sounds incredibly hard. I'm so sorry you're going through that." For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt heard. He told me my feelings were valid. He told me I deserved to be happy. It started with coffee after church. Then it turned into texting during the week. He became the person I told everything to. He was my friend. He took my side, something my own husband never did. Was it an affair? Yes. It became one. And I know it was a betrayal. I live with that guilt every single day. But at the time, it felt less like I was betraying my husband and more like I was saving myself. I was suffocating in my own home, and my conversations with Mark were the only air I could get. I was so desperate for someone to tell me I was okay just the way I was, that I took that validation from the first person who offered it, without thinking about the consequences. The last few months, things at home got even worse. The silence became heavier, colder. My husband was distant in a way that felt different. I'd try to talk to him, and he'd give one-word answers while staring at his phone. I assumed he was just stressed with his studies, but there was an edge to him I couldn't quite place. I was trying to pull back from Mark, consumed with guilt, but the void at home just kept pulling me back. Then one night he just exploded. He came at me out of nowhere, accusing me of not loving him, of him not being important to me. He listed all the things he'd done for me, all the ways he'd tried to help me. The fight was brutal. It was like he was reading from a script of all my deepest insecurities. Hearing him say it all out loud, accusing me of being a failure as a wife, was devastating. It was also so close to the truth of how unhappy I was that it knocked the wind out of me. It was a horrifying, painful wake-up call. I looked at the man yelling at me, and I looked at the mess my life had become, and I knew I had to do something. I had to choose. I suggested I go stay with my parents for a couple of weeks. I told him we both needed to clear our heads to figure out if there was anything left to save. I wasn't running away. I was trying to find a way back. I thought if I could get some space from his constant silent judgment, I could find the strength to come back and really try. To end things with Mark for good. And dedicate myself to fixing what I had broken. I wanted to make it work. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. He was calm, almost gentle. When I was leaving, he hugged me at the door and said, "Take care of yourself." For the first time in months, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe this was our rock bottom. Maybe we could build from here. That hope lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, I was having coffee with my mom in the kitchen when there was a knock on the door. It was a man in a cheap suit asking for me by name. He handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it right there in the doorway, my mom looking over my shoulder. Divorce papers. I didn't understand at first. My brain just couldn't process it. I read the words, but they felt like a foreign language. Then I saw the date on the documents. He'd had a lawyer draft these over a month ago. A month! That meant for the last 30 days, every dinner we shared, every time he kissed me goodnight, every conversation, it was all a lie. The fight wasn't a moment of spontaneous anger. It was a planned-out performance. He pushed me into that fight so he would have a reason to get me out of the house. The hug at the door wasn't about hope. It was goodbye. I just started screaming. It wasn't even a word, just this horrible sound that came out of me. I couldn't breathe. My legs gave out, and I just collapsed onto the floor in my parents' hallway. My mom had to pick the papers up off the floor and call him because I couldn't speak. I just laid there sobbing while she stood in the kitchen, her voice shaking, asking him, "What did you do? What did you do to her?" He was perfectly calm, she told me later. He explained it all with the cold logic of a business transaction. He said it was the most efficient way to handle it. While I was a hysterical mess on the floor, he was executing the next phase of his plan. Later that day, my mom drove me to the store to get some things I hadn't packed. I tried to pay with my debit card. Decline. I tried the credit card. Decline. I called the bank thinking it was a mistake. It wasn't. He had already been to the bank that morning. He had frozen our joint credit card and transferred exactly half of our savings into a new account that I had no access to. He didn't just serve me with divorce papers. He cut off my entire life in a single morning. That's when the threat started. When I finally was able to talk to him on the phone, the man I had known for over a decade was gone. In his place was a cold, calculating stranger. He told me he knew everything. He'd been secretly reading my private text messages for weeks, maybe longer. He knew all about Mark. He said if I fought him on anything, the house, the money, anything, he would make sure the entire church found out. He would ruin Mark's career and reputation. And he would drag my name through the mud in court until I had nothing left. He used my affair as a weapon to guarantee my silence. He painted me as the unstable, cheating wife, and himself as the calm, rational victim who was just trying to manage a difficult situation. My mom tried to help me, calling him to figure out logistics, and he told me she was manipulating me and trying to turn me against him. He isolated me, cornered me, and made sure I was completely powerless. This wasn't a heartbroken man lashing out. This was an ambush. It was a planned military-style operation designed to cause the maximum amount of humiliation and pain. The divorce was a blur. I did what he said. My lawyer told me I could fight for more, but I was terrified. He had all the evidence, all the power, and all the control. He had spent a month planning his perfect victory while I was still trying to save our marriage. He took the house, most of the money, and our whole life together. He got to keep the narrative he had so carefully crafted, the good, patient husband who was betrayed by his ungrateful wife. The only thing I fought for was our dog, Charlie. He was a scruffy little terrier mix we'd adopted a few years back. In that silent, lonely house, Charlie was my only friend. He'd lay his head on my lap while I cried, and he was just happy to be near me. He didn't care if I was overweight or underemployed. He just loved me. My husband didn't even really want him, but he fought me on it at first just because he could. In the end, I think he gave in because it was the one thing he could use to show how generous he was. I got to keep the dog. I live in a small apartment. Just me and Charlie. Some days are so hard I can barely get out of bed. The guilt over what I did is something I'll carry forever. I betrayed my marriage, and I have to own that. But I also know that the man who planned my takedown with such breathtaking cruelty is the same man I was living with all along. The man who saw me as a project to be fixed, a problem to be solved. His love was always a transaction, and when I failed to hold up my end of the bargain by becoming the woman he wanted, he liquidated his assets. I was just an asset. I'm not a villain, and I'm not a victim. I'm just a woman who made a huge mistake while trying to escape a situation that was slowly crushing her spirit. He broke me down piece by piece for 10 years. I don't know who I am without him telling me all the ways I need to be better. But I'm starting to figure it out. It's quiet here, but it's not the lonely quiet of his disappointment. It's just quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I can finally breathe.